RKW is brewed by 8th and Roast on a big show as the Tennessee Titans get their guy. Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan, the choice, the first pick to interview and the first pick to interview twice. Guys, the biggest things that we like about Brian Callahan, that is the question that we ask to the people, that we ask on 104.5 The Zone TV, which is up and running, streaming live on 104.5 The Zone TV. Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch.
Please.
What do you like the most about Brian Callahan?
Me personally, he's been there before at every level, it seems like, in the NFL. The management of getting Cincinnati to where they are, he was a part of that reconstruction. Having a phenom of a quarterback, he was part of that development. And the idea that he was in on all things of the operation, being next to Zach Taylor, I think that right there was very important too. It was almost as if he was mentored for this spot right here. His experience to me is what does it more than anything, specifically at the quarterback position, and just the operation of the offense. And talking to other people, having longer conversations about what Zach Taylor's been in the NFL, he plays to his players' highlights, it seems, more than anything. He'll let the players to flow how they need to within the construction of his offense or the way they're going to set up this team. And that's all I've heard. That's all I've read about him also. And I think that's crucial in today's game, to where you can't just be the authoritarian or the dictator or, hey, I rule with an iron fist. Today's players way different from the players that we've loved in the past, in the early 90s or early 2000s and stuff like that. It is a different game. And all things I've read and all people I've talked to say he's very stern and firm, but you get a sense of personality with him. You get a conversation out of him, too. And I think the players have somewhat said the same things if you look at the stuff that they've said about them.
Yeah.
About him.
Yeah, I mean, that quote fits up perfectly. Like, you know, I have here, he's a calm guy. Goes about his business, but can be fiery when needed, does a good job in front of the room. I mean, that explains it all. He knows when it's time to step in and kind of be that coach, but he also knows how to work with his players. He's a guy that in this day and age, I feel like you're looking around the league, we're getting younger and younger with coaches. And I feel like he's just the next head coach that fits that mold. And I'm not going to put him in a mold saying he's just like any of these other coaches, but he is younger. Yeah. He does, I feel like, relate to a little bit more of a new generation of players because it is getting to be a younger league. And I love the fact that he's been a guy who's known that, you know what, the best thing for me might have been just to sit here for 5 years with Zach Taylor and learn the most I can learn under a guy like this in an organization that has been on the up and up with a quarterback who is one of the best when he is healthy. And instead of being like somebody who bolts and tries to get a head coaching job maybe after 2 years or 3 years, I think it's awesome to see that he sat and kind of waited till his time where he really thought, okay, I'm ready for this, right? Mm-hmm. And I think he probably got the most out of what he could in Cincinnati. He helped develop not only Joe Burrow, but Jake Browning in the last 6 games or so of the season. I think we saw some good stuff out of Jake Browning that we didn't expect. So his work with quarterbacks leads me to believe, guys, that this is a good pairing for what they hope to do with Will Levis, which is to continue to develop him.
For me, I like that he's Amy Adams Strunk's first choice. It's obvious that this is the guy Amy Adams Strunk and Rand Carthon wanted all along in this process, and his resume speaks for itself, right? We can comb through, and we will, the 4,000-yard seasons, the experience with Peyton Manning, making Derek Carr a 4,000-yard passer in the NFL, the Joe Burrow ties. I mean, he's worked with everybody from Tim Tebow to Andy Dalton as well in his career. But the fact that the Titans didn't let him leave the building with meetings that were originally scheduled today with Carolina and scheduled tomorrow with Atlanta tells me that there's something in that resume and there's something in the way Brian Callahan speaks about his plan that lines up with what the Titans want. Yeah. When you fire a coach the way the Titans let go of Mike Vrabel, the first doubt that creeps into your mind is, will this hurt you with candidates who are the most attractive options for you in this coaching carousel, right? When you surprise so many national reporters and so many people in the league, your thought goes to the place of, okay, well, then is anyone going to really want this job, right? The Athletic made it the next to last most attractive opening. If it was really the 6th most attractive opening for 7 total, then I don't think Brian Callahan would be the guy here. Right. This was clearly Amy Adams Strunk's first choice. It was important for this team to go ahead and move forward and get something done in order to be ready for the next steps that are coming in the Senior Bowl next week and all of these things. But they interviewed 2 minority candidates in person, and David Shaw and Thomas Brown. And there's an interesting caveat of the Thomas Brown interview that we'll get to coming up in a few minutes as well. But it's obvious. Brian Callahan was the first guy to interview. He was the first guy to have a second interview once those opened in person for NFL candidates, and they didn't let him leave the building when they had another interview scheduled today with Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn. This was Amy's guy.
Yeah, that's huge, too, that you were first pick. As bad as that seems, especially from a fan base that somewhat had to deal with that conversation and narrative nationally, too, is you're changing that narrative by getting the guy that you initially want. Will, great point to me. And Kayla brought up another good reason, though, too, is the sustainability of what Cincinnati was capable of doing without Joe Burrow, too. And not just this year, but last year and other years in particular also. What I do like is this. You look at Burrow's rookie year, and, of course, the ACL injury. I think you look at Levis' situation and somewhat say the same thing, too, as far as just like, dog, you got to find a way to stay healthy. And Joe Burrow, for the most part, other than protection, he's been mostly healthy for his team. Now, whatever he went through, was it the elbow or shoulder or something earlier this year, you can't really control that. That's part of the game when it comes down to your throwing motion and if somebody hits your arm and whatnot. But to say that Joe Burrow has done a better job of protecting himself, knowing when to slide and get down, I had somebody tell me last night, and I'll get to that point too, some of the quotes and people we reached out to, that this seems to have been a quarterback-based hire. And if that's okay with you guys, I think that's fair to say as far as how he's gone about developing Burrow. Jake Browning now is releasing comments at the end of the season about how he thinks he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the world. Okay? Like, that's saying something in itself, and it's not just – all Brian Callahan. It's, of course, the Cincinnati offense. Jamar Chase is a very unique animal. They got some good pieces around him. Joe Mixon is very solid. But if you also look at the offensive structure of what Cincinnati ran, you will say this. Joe Mixon was a focal point of it. They've had other running backs that play hard ball. They do like to run the ball. We saw them come to Nashville and with Quentin Spain and run up and down the field also, right? It wasn't like they was world beaters when they came here. Heck, he was sacked 9 times. Joe Burrow was. We just recently discussed that. So to have that conversation about what they're capable of offensively is one thing. What his defensive philosophies will be, I don't know. But it has to be Tennessee aggressive. It has to be AFC South noteworthy. It has to be able to compete with what the AFC and also NFC is capable of doing too. Next year's schedule doesn't get easier. You got more travel in it next year. And, of course, you're the new guys on the block. So, offensively, I love the idea that this team has hired that type of guy because you don't have to worry about somebody coming to take your head coach because most OCs in today's NFL get hired in other places. But if he has a level of excellence here and winning here and consistency, I think that's the biggest word from it all, is consistency. And he's here to last for a while.
Right. And look, there's going to be ups and downs in year one. We all know that. I don't think anybody, thinks that this is going to be just smooth sailing from out of the gates. There's a lot to fix on this team, and he'll have the resources to do so. But I think I'm just really, really interested in how he puts together this staff from the offensive coordinator in terms of, is it somebody the Titans maybe even interviewed already that might be interested in coming to an organization like this and working with a guy like, Brian Callahan, who has a great reputation and building something here from scratch. And on the defensive side, does he dive into his dad's, Rolodex and all his dad's connections in the league with the defensive coordinator? Or do you have an opportunity to take a guy like Terrell Williams, who is reportedly going to be interviewing with the Bears, I think, for their
Correct.
Defensive coordinator role? Do you do something like that? Because he's been really proving himself here as a next level guy. So there are a lot of questions to be asked. I think that's what I'm so excited to see is Now just the building of it and how he decides to do that, and what, if there's anything that they maintain on this current staff in terms of, coaches.
615-737-1045. Your chance to react to the Titans reportedly hiring Brian Callahan, the Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator, first reported last night by NFL.com's Tom Pelissero. Buck Rising talked last night on A to Z Sports Primetime about that very conversation about offensive coordinator, and he echoed the exact same thoughts that we discussed yesterday. I think they interviewed the offensive coordinator, and I think it's Thomas Brown. And from what Buck Rising said last night on A to Z Sports Primetime, that is their first choice, and that is the direction the Titans would like to go.
So that is the former Carolina Panthers offensive coordinator, Thomas Brown, who was interviewed here to be the next head coach, and who, an educated guess, I believe it is their intention to bring him in as the offensive coordinator, pending what other opportunities might be available to Thomas Brown under Brian Callahan. Gabriel Ruiz.
So there's Buck Rising last night. A to Z Sports Primetime, of course, subscribe to the A to Z Sports YouTube channel. Watch A to Z Sports Primetime every time Buck Rising talks to you and bloviates about the Tennessee Titans with a chat and with all of the community there. They do a great job. But all of that to be said, guys, Thomas Brown, I think, could be this cycle's Matt LaFleur. And at the very least, you have a guy in him who may get looks elsewhere and might decide, look, if I'm going to be able to get a play calling offensive coordinator gig somewhere else, obviously that would make a lot of sense for him. But a guy from the Sean McVay coaching tree who shares the same roots as Brian Callahan and working under Zach Taylor, who is within that McVay and Shanahan coaching tree as well, would have a seamless transition to working for Brian Callahan. You've also got Charles London, who's on staff, Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator for the Kentucky Wildcats, who spent time with Will Levis and spent time with the Rams organization as well just a couple of years ago. I think some combination, guys, of those three coaches is who you're going to end up having on this staff. Thomas Brown, Liam Cohen, Charles London. I think if you get two of those three guys, then you are in outstanding shape with Will Levis and with the development that you want him to make next season.
Yeah, you have to. Again, that year two jump is always going to be necessary, at least to show the promise of what you're capable of being a pro. I've always told people the rookie year you shock people by, hey, I'm here, I've arrived, like here I go. But you don't know what you do not know in your rookie year. And it's a lot you ingest, you take in, you get your first off season, going afterwards. And so that year two, you have no classes for the most part. Some guys are probably finishing the degrees, but you have no classes. You have no outside entities that you have to worry about as far as your obligations to stuff. Your obligation is to be a pro, so the expectation is you're supposed to grow into that second year. So this is a crucial hire for Will Levis, whether Coach Charles London sticks around as part of his development or whether it be Coach Callahan that curates Will Levis moving forward, or Thomas Brown too. This is the idea that he does need to take that step, because if we're to believe in Will Levis, then we need to see a higher passing percentage than 56%. We need to see a careful ran offense to where he can deliver plays and not trying to be a hero every single time. Something that was spoken highly of about Joe Burrow and how they put him in situations to be successful and trusted him in those situations too. And the last one to me is, how does he protect himself? If you're going to potentially have a rookie left tackle, you're going to have a second-year guard, and there might be different other players around too.
Brian Callahan has spoken about that with Kevin Clark, now of ESPN, who was at The Ringer, in a piece during training camp of August 2022. I tweeted it out on my account at Will_Bowling last night, talking about fixing the issues with Cincinnati's offensive line that, of course, allowed 9 sacks and since he's win over the Titans in the 2022 AFC divisional round. And they went through every single sack that Joe Burrow took in that season as a team and as an offense, as an offensive line going into the 2022 season in August of 2022. And it's interesting. Remember last season when the Titans played the Browns and Mike Vrabel explained to us and Tim Kelly explained to us why you can't always put 2 guys on Myles Garrett?
Yeah.
In this article, I'm quoting, "On third down," Callahan said, "you'll always have to put 2 guys on Myles Garrett."
That's fair.
You'll always have to put two guys on Myles Garrett and make similar adjustments for TJ Watt. In the 4 games a year they play against teams in the AFC North, they went through every sack and told Joe Burrow, you held the ball too long on this one. This one, you're in empty, and you've got 4 out in the route, and you just got to get the ball out of your hands. This one, you could have scrambled. This one, you played too much hero ball, right? That's the other thing I like, Kayla, too, and his experience with Bill Callahan. His dad, obviously, is an offensive line coach. Brian Callahan knows how to make a good offense out of a bad offensive line. And what has this team had for the last 2 years? A very bad offensive line.
Yeah, and firsthand, we've all documented Cincinnati's struggles. We all were impressed that Joe Burrow was still alive after a couple seasons there with that offensive line. But you're right. I mean, he knows what he's getting himself into here, and that is rebuilding an offensive line. I mean, you've got a quarterback that's in his second year and didn't play the whole first year, and you're going to have to work very closely with Ran Carthon and making sure you're making the right moves to have this line get somewhat better. I don't know. I'm not going to say it can get worse because I felt like I said that last year and it got worse.
Please don't say that.
So you would think that it can only go up from there, but I think that's crucial. And I think that's why it would be awesome to have a guy like Bill Callahan, his dad. And even if his dad doesn't join the staff, because he is with Cleveland right now as the offensive line coach. And there's some stipulations in terms of bringing him over in a lateral move. So there's a lot to be discussed there if the Browns would let him go. But even having his dad as a mind to pick, with that, he's learned so much from him. And to be able to know how to work with that, Will, you're right, with not having a lot in front of you. And they're hoping to better that, but you're going to have a young offensive line. I mean, that's a thing. They're going to be young. They're going to make mistakes. And it feels like at least you have a guy who understands that and is going to know how to work with that to protect their quarterback. So I think it all is going to kind of work hand in hand and intertwine nicely when it's all said and done.
615-737-1045, our number. What do you like the most about the Brian Callahan pick? You can join us there. You can join us in the F&M Bank chat as well, wherever you watch 1045 The Zone TV, right there in the comment section, and we will get to you right there. Again, Zach Taylor, very complimentary of the man who started in the NFL as an offensive line assistant for the Broncos in 2010. Coming up this morning, we're going to hear from Cincinnati radio host Mo Edgar coming up at 8:20 on his thoughts on Brian Callahan. What specifically makes him different from other non-play calling offensive coordinators? I know ESPN's Teron Davenport wrote last night about Callahan's ability to find success despite having issues along the offensive line should bode well for the Titans, who have shortcomings there as well. We do have Ian Rappaport last night on NFL Network, Robert, if we can get that here too, about the speed with which this search was completed and the interest that the Titans had ultimately in the Bengals offensive coordinator that manifested itself into a deal that was close last night and should be official within 24 hours. Here's Ian Rappaport on NFL Network.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the great quarterbacks that he has worked with. Obviously, the work that he has done with Joe Burrow has certainly been noted. But it's not just that. The fact that he got Jake Browning this year to play as well as he did certainly played into it, because so much of what you want to do if you're the head coach and certainly the essentially de facto offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans is make sure that Will Levis plays at as high a level as possible. This is one of the better quarterback tutors in the game. And you know, as far as the Titans go, it's not like they were just looking for an offensive guy, defensive guy. They're looking for a leader, someone to help build the culture. And the way that the Cincinnati Bengals behind Zach Taylor have built this culture, and Brian Callahan has been right there alongside him ever since he was hired. This is part of what they want to replicate in Tennessee. General Manager Ran Carthon had his biggest task, I would say, as general manager after the firing of Mike Vrabel, and he now lands Brian Callahan as his new head coach in deal, soon to be final.
Titans, the first team to make a hire for a coach that was outside their building when the process began. More of your reaction coming up at 615-737-1045. What did Zach Taylor have to say about what exactly his offensive coordinator has done under his leadership of the AFC champions a couple of years ago. We'll hear from him coming up next. RKW is brewed by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone, and Titans fans were saying, gimme a coach before midnight on Tuesday. Oh, come on. You don't all have to laugh at once.
No, I enjoyed it. That's why I played the
Was that
song.
a
I'm
joke?
glad
Sorry.
you
That's
picked up
right.
on
You're
it.
just
That one.
oblivious. It's the song.
It's the song?
The song is
I
called
had
Gimme,
no-
Gimme, Gimme. It's an ABBA. Watch Mamma Mia, dang
I've
it.
heard ABBA.
615-737-1045. Shadows until you watch the movie.
What about the County Crows? Have you heard from them lately?
I know, but guess who's going to be performing at the Senior Bowl?
Stop it.
Yes, they
The
are.
Counting Crows?
The Counting Crows. Or the which,
You can go down there and count them.
I did, well, which one is it now? I'm confused
Which
myself.
one do you think it is?
It's the County Crows. That's
No.
who they are.
It's the Counting Crows.
Counting.
All right, anyway.
Well, they're performing at the Senior Bowl, respectfully.
Dang.
Yeah, the Counting
What the
Crows.
heck?
Yeah. I just saw that yesterday.
Man.
Speaking of which is what I was speaking about yesterday. I would expect them to want to get a coach before the Senior Bowl and everything.
You called it.
NFL business, that is. Not that I'm bragging on myself or nothing like that.
I feel like
but
everyone was playing that down when I asked that. I was like, isn't it
What?
important to get like and everyone's like, oh, but that's just about getting the right coach. And I'm like, what?
I still think that.
I'm not
We
talking
did-
about
oh,
you guys.
but
I'm talking
no.
about when we interviewed other people here.
But I think
It
it's
was-
part of it.
Oh,
It was
well,
kind of
they-
like playing it down like, oh, it's just about getting. I'm like, but isn't it kind of important? Like, that's a big thing to go to and
when they
kind
started,
of bond with your GM and find your guys.
yes, that's your first football experience
Yeah.
as a new group. So, of course, they would. The longer it goes on, the more news they get to stoke up, okay? So that's usually how it goes on that end. But I'm excited to see what it's going to look like and how Rand and the front office and Coach Callahan will now operate as a unit. I think that's what's most – it's going to be more interesting to see and hear coming out of the building, how everybody works. Do you hear one voice or do you hear three? You know, when it all breaks down. And, of course, it has to be one voice for everything to work right with teams more than anything.
Bengals head coach Zach Taylor was asked about what exactly Brian Callahan does for a non-play calling offensive coordinator, and he had this to say.
He coordinates everything having to do with it. He establishes the whole structure of our offense. On game day, he and I are in constant communication. That is calling plays. That is establishing an offense. He has helped develop every position we have. He's invaluable. There's really not enough things I can say about him that if someone just followed us for a week and saw it, it would be, oh, no wonder everyone's so high on Brian.
The thing that I like, guys, is in an old piece in 2018 in The Athletic. That's how far back I was going late last night. Reading about Brian Callahan, talked about how Peyton Manning is one of the biggest influences on his career in the time they spent together with the Denver Broncos. And he said Peyton prepared so well that when he would ask follow-up questions, I needed to always have an answer. And I would go into the film room with Peyton Manning and always come back with something. That way I could advance the conversation and not just sit there and listen to Peyton. And said Peyton Manning has forever changed the way I view preparation and the quarterback position itself.
Being around greatness, Will, the demand for more, right? The demand for more. And hearing Zach Taylor honestly talk to me, I think is more impressive than him actually calling the plays. Because setting up the structure stuff, to me, it sounds like you're managing the entire operation, right? And if we're being honest, if Brian Callahan doesn't take over play calling duties, he has to understand how to run a team, how to run an offensive side of the ball, how to set people up to be successful. That's what we're asking of the head coach. We're going to be honest, right? More times than not, how can you set this team up? Because he's not just responsible for the offense. He's responsible for special teams, defense, his coaches, the players' personalities, and even managing some of the business for the team, too. So to hear that he's capable of setting up everybody else for success, whether that be Zach Taylor, hey, here's your call sheet for the week, this is what we're doing, or communicating on and off consistently with Joe Burrow and the offensive line and the running game coach and everybody, like Jamar Chase, what do you need? I think when they realized that Jamar Chase was going to be that good, they made him their number one and quick. But not just that, their other wide receivers, 8 too. Tyler Boyd, 8. T. Higgins, 8. They had tight ends go to other teams and get paid too. So if he's responsible for setting up that structure, you have to be somewhat excited about the guy that knows how to manage his people, at least on the offensive side of the ball. That, to me, I think is more impressive than saying, well, he doesn't call plays. No, this guy sets up everybody else's success. That's not to be understated when you're talking about what the actual job of your coach is. Not micromanaging everybody, but setting everybody up to be successful, to me, is very much impressive.
And that's, I think, what Amy Adams Strunk was looking for in a head coach, is somebody who may not always want the attention on him for doing everything, but making sure it's everybody who's a part of the team that's the reason why they're finding success. And you've heard it time and time again with the collaboration words, and now we're seeing all the stuff that's come out about her and Mike Vrabel and why they clashed heads. Because, Vrabel is a guy who I think a lot of people associated with the Titans as being the Titans, Mike Vrabel. And I think she looks at Brian Callahan as a guy that, okay, he's not going to always demand all the attention, and he's going to do what's best for the team in terms of, everybody eats, like Ramon Foster says. Like, that's the kind of vibe I get from this Brian Callahan hire, is that he doesn't need to be the me guy. He wants to be the guy that's going to set everybody up for success so they can win together. And you had mentioned him working with Peyton Manning. That was a Super Bowl winning team that year. So he's also been on that journey of winning a Super Bowl.
And for the people who are going to reply to that, and myself too, before I read more about Brian Callahan with the, what's to separate him from Adam Gase, who also was loved by Peyton Manning and succeeded with Peyton Manning as a coordinator. You also have Derek Carr and Matthew Stafford, who were made 4,000-yard passers by Brian Callahan. So I hesitate to just tie it to Peyton Manning, obviously, but I think that's the impressive thing, is that the Peyton Manning piece of understanding preparation, understanding that next level and the communication between an elite quarterback and an offensive coordinator kind of kickstarted everything else that happened for Brian Callahan. This is not a guy who just hitched his wagon to one of the best quarterbacks, probably the second best quarterback of all time. He learned from that experience and used that to create 4,000-yard passers everywhere he's ever been. 615-737-1045. Your thoughts on Brian Callahan coming up next. What people around the league are saying, according to ESPN's Dan Graziano, who wrote last night in a piece with Teron Davenport and Mike Tannenbaum on ESPN.com. Your phone calls as well. We'll start with Titans Bill on the other side. 615-737-1045. 1 hour down, 3 more to go in RKW. Brewed up by 8th and Roast. Hey, what's going on? It's Will Bowling. If you are a business owner or facility manager, you have a lot on your plate and a lot to keep up with. That can include assessing your equipment and systems, evaluating indoor air quality, outlining new cleaning procedures, or even reviewing options for implementing touchless plumbing and electrical fixtures. That's a lot, but Lee Company, they can help you with it all. Whatever your to-do list looks like, Lee Company, they're here to help. And they have been in the facility management and maintenance business for decades. And look, it's easy to put off these big projects. Look, we've all been snowed in a little bit more, maybe to our place of business, maybe at home. We've recognized the things that don't work maybe a little more clearly over the past couple of days. We'll put Lee Company's professional expertise to work for you today. HVAC, electrical, and plumbing, they do it all. Call Lee Company at 615-567-1000 or contact them online at leecompany.com. HVAC, electrical, and plumbing, Lee Company, they are all you need. 615-567-1000 or online at leecompany.com. That's Lee Company, all you need.
7:01. Good morning from the 104.5 The Zone Studios. I'm Robert Walsh. The Titans got their guy. Brian Callahan is the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Callahan was previously a quarterback coach with the Lions, Raiders, and Bengals before becoming their OC in 2019. A couple of the quarterbacks that Callahan has worked with: Joe Burrow, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, and Peyton Manning. Now the Titans are primed and ready. Start putting their staff together. Some potential staff additions include Thomas Brown, Bengals quarterback coach Dan Pitcher, and potentially his father, offensive line coach Bill Callahan. More on that to come. For all your foundation repair and waterproofing needs, visit USSTN.com. Breaking news at once on your home for the Titans and Vols. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Seven a.m. in Nashville, and the Tennessee Titans have their guy. Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. You're up. 615-737-1045. That is how you react all morning long, all day long, right here on 104.5 The Zone. We are RKW, brewed up by 8th and Roast, with locations on 8th Avenue, Charlotte, the Broadview at Vanderbilt, and the airport. 8th and Roast Coffee cultivates community by the cup. 615-737-1045 is our number. Ramon Foster, Kayla Anderson, Robert Walsh, our producer. I'm Will Bowling. The coaches that Brian Callahan has worked with. There's some good ones on this list, ladies and gentlemen. I know, Kayla, you just put this out just a few minutes ago. John Fox, Gary Kubiak, Jim Caldwell, John Gruden, and Zach Taylor. The path to Brian Callahan, the 39-year-old, becoming the head coach of the Tennessee Titans.
Yes, big time right there, man. Congratulations to him and the Titans for getting their search and getting it over with quick, too. Here's the thing. What are they, number 3 behind hires right now as far as Patriots, Raiders, and now Titans with their guy?
First team to hire a candidate who was not already in their building.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's what they wanted. That's a big reason why, this trade thing didn't happen with Mike Vrabel's. They wanted to get ahead of it. And look, Brian Callahan is a coach right now that a lot of people are looking at. And I think Amy Adams Strunk made it clear this is the one that we want, and to get out in front of it. And you saw it from the very first request of interview. The virtual one. That was their very first one, the very first callback interview. And now it looks like this is going to be the head coach. You said it earlier, Will. From the jump, it looks like this was Amy Adams Strunk guy.
Paul Denner Jr. wrote an interesting piece in The Athletic last night that gives even more clarity onto exactly how much Amy Adams Strunk wanted Brian Callahan to be her head coach. Sent a plane to send him down here for his second interview. And the interesting part of this is the weather around Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport had Brian Callahan ready to drive 4 hours and head to Nashville. He was going to drive. He was going to do this on Sunday. And then the Tennessee Titans sent a plane. And Paul Denner Jr. writes this in The Athletic that says, would Titans brass send the plane for any stranded candidate? Maybe. That they sent one for Callahan, one of just 3 candidates to receive a second interview after their first wave of sessions on video calls, landed a pretty clear message of intent. The Titans quite literally talked to the bare minimum candidates that they could speak to in person, and then got this done as quickly as possible. Amy Adams Strunk not letting Brian Callahan get to interviews today with Carolina, which was scheduled with owner David Tepper, or Wednesday in Atlanta, a second interview in person with the Falcons. This was their guy, the first guy to interview over Zoom, and the first guy to interview in person after David Shaw, who is out of the league.
I'm just glad to see them skip the line like this. If you know this is your dude and you guys have had great conversations in the building over video, make him your guy. I hate the hesitancy, Kayla. Like you said, a lot of people said having the idea that, you got to wait till the end of the month. No, if that's your dude, go get your guy. And I'm glad to see that they finally got this locked in. Now that we get more clarity and he can actually probably talk to the team or at least have some sense of communication with him, although most people are out of town right now, though. But at least he can start that communication aspect of his new job soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing that Amy Adams Strunk relayed to Mike Keith in that interview after she fired Mike Vrabel was, we're not going to, let you know our whole vision yet. But I think part of that was whoever came to her and impressed her enough with their vision, and maybe to see if it aligned with Amy Adams Strunk and Rand Carthon's vision, that was going to be their guy. And I could see in a guy like Brian Callahan, with all that we have heard firsthand from people that have worked with him, that he is just an outstanding, not only football guy, guys, he's an outstanding person. That has come out of the mouths of many players, many assistant coaches that have worked with him. And I think that the alignment of those two, in terms of Rand Carthon and Amy Adams Strunk and Brian Callahan's vision, was too good to be like, we're letting him walk out of here.
Yeah.
And they didn't let him walk out of the room.
Love it.
615-737-1045, our number. Titans Bill first up on the phone lines from Knox County this morning. What's up, Bill?
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to all three of you.
Thank you. Good morning.
What a week this has been. Yesterday, George McIntyre committed to Tennessee, and today we got our man. I'm very excited about the hire, and I am giving both Amy Adams Strunk and Rand Carthon an A+. I love the hire.
Let's go.
All right.
Love it.
Love that.
Thank you, Titans Bill. We appreciate the call.
A+.
Strong start of the morning right there.
Strong start.
Let's match Bill's energy, please, out of Knoxville today.
That's big time right out of Knox County. Let's go.
And the note on that, by the way, real quick, is that George McIntyre will join us this time tomorrow.
Perfect.
New Tennessee quarterback commitment. Devin is in Indy up next. 615-737-1045. What's up, Devin?
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Hey, quick question for you. I'm ecstatic about the Callahan hire. I think that'll do really good for the Titans being in the AFC South with a stronger division. My question is, I understand the intrigue around Brown as far as being an OC, but would they not benefit more for bringing in someone that would innately have a longer tenure than 1 year? Because I believe that Brown will come in and do really well, and then he's gone next year. So I think that if they would probably do better with bringing in an OC that will last a little longer. That way there's more familiarity and continuity on the team.
Yeah, thanks, Devin.
That's all I had to say.
Yeah, appreciate the call.
I'll tell you this with this whole new process, Devin, don't live in your fears.
Yeah.
You cannot do that because here's the thing, too, when you look at saying a hot OC, if it is Thomas Brown, and one of these other candidates is this. If he's hot, no matter who the name is, he's probably going to be gone anyhow. And what we're looking at Coach Callahan to do here in Nashville is to set the structure and the baseline and a standard and an operation that's bulletproof from here forward. That's what you're looking for. So if he has been a guy in Cincinnati to set up the offensive structure for the Bengals for a while, if he understands how his team is going to operate, if he gives these guys a new culture and how they need to be as a team moving forward, it doesn't matter who moves in and moves out as far as your staff is concerned. Heck, that is a badge of honor more than anything when you look at it. Sean McVay worry about that type of stuff? No. Does Kyle Shanahan worry about that type of stuff? No. Kyle Shanahan had people leave to go get head coaching jobs under his tenure right now. A guy in Houston, and that team is still flourishing. That's because it's set up a certain way to operate. What we have to stop doing is believing in just one person is going to be the executioner of all things here in Nashville. I think that's where, honestly, where a lot of people fell blind to what Vrabel had going on here too. If we can be completely honest, the success of this team, I think a lot of people laid on the shoulders of Vrabel contributing to it. No, it has to be everybody that has the same exact message. So no matter how many assistants you lose, the operation must remain the same. And I'm not sure if you could say that in years past here. And that's no knock towards Vrabel because every coach gets better. That was Vrabel's first head coaching job also. So, of course, I'm sure he will be better in other places too. But to be scared about an OC leaving or DC leaving, you can't live that life, because as long as you trust in what the head coach has laid down, and specifically being an offensive head coach this time, then you expect the structure to somewhat remain the same, regardless of who is the new play caller. And here's the other portion of it too, is if Will Levis is your guy for the future too, then most guys that come in to coach him and coach his offense has to somewhat cater to what he wants anyway. So as soon as Will Levis figure out what he wants to be as a quarterback and what plays he like, what runs he like, and who guys he want to throw to, nothing else matters whoever the offensive coordinator is, other than setting up and scheming other defenses.
Part of that, too, and we've talked about it with the Detroit Lions and why they continue to be set up for success, even if they lose Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, is because they have guys that can probably be promoted from within that understand are part of the whole plan. That is something that Brian Callahan probably needs to do too, is build up some of these guys that if you do lose your offensive coordinator, you've got a guy that you really feel has the same mindset, is on the same page as you, that you can promote, and that can be seamless. So that's part of the job he's going to have to do too with the staff if they want to have long-term success.
Even if you get a no-name guy, he still has the opportunity of being gone a year later.
Yep.
Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans, was on none of our radars last year as a low-level assistant of the San Francisco 49ers. He became the OC in Houston. Now he's being floated around for jobs, including this one. If the guy's good and is an offensive guru, he's not going to last. And that's the reality of the situation. It's also why you hire an offensive coach with ties to some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. 615-737-1045. More of your phone calls on the other side. We'll get to this blurb from Dan Graziano of ESPN.com on what people say around the league about the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans, and specifically where Brian Callahan ranked among the best offensive coordinators in the league, as voted on by over 1,600 players in the NFL in the NFLPA. We'll get to that coming up next. 615-737-1045 on RKW, brewed up by 8th and Roast.
Hey, it's Kayla Anderson with QC Kinetics. You can make the decision right now to get lasting relief from that awful joint pain for 2024. Don't go another year compromising because of that pain in your knees or your shoulder or back. Call QC Kinetics now. QC Kinetics is the nation's leader in regenerative non-surgical pain relief. Look, your body actually has what it needs to restore and repair that damaged tissue, and QC Kinetics can make it happen with no drugs, no surgery, and no downtime. The future of pain treatments have arrived, and QC Kinetics has tens of thousands of satisfied patients all over America, people that are experiencing that back, hip pain, and any associated pain with arthritis or an injury. And this is not a Band-Aid, folks, but it is a revolutionary treatment that can get you moving again, get your life back, and listen, it's non-surgical. So for a free consultation, get it on your calendar now. Call QC Kinetics at 615-249-4024. That's 615-249-4024.
RKW is brewed up by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone. 615-737-1045 is the number. Streaming live on 104.5 The Zone TV, Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch, where you can watch the show and interact in the YouTube chat. We've got a lot of folks hanging out there, and you can subscribe to the channel as well. Don't miss out on the introductory press conference, the reaction all day long here on The Zone. This is going to be the place to be. Always is the place to be. I'm not breaking any news to you like what was breaking last night when Brian Callahan was made the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, according to NFL.com's Tom Pelissero. Bam is in Nashville up next. 615-737-1045. What's up, Bam?
Good morning, America. How are we feeling this morning?
We're great.
Good, Bam.
Good morning.
Hey, man, the vibes are kind of high, man. This is something that gives us a little bit of hope for, a better tomorrow. I'm anxious to see how, he maneuvers the offense. For me personally, I'd be glad if he decides he wants to keep Derek or whatever. That's just me in a perfect world. But I want to see if T. Higgins comes or just the philosophy in which we're going to go with the offense. We're finally getting something that I feel like will really benefit Will Levis even more. And I am anxious to see which way we go with this defense, too. So with Cincinnati, what are y'all's opinions on how he maneuvers with the defense? And just all the way around, it's a fresh start. And it kind of gives you, I actually slept good last night for the first time in a while when it comes to the Titans because, boy, they stress you clean out to where you don't know which way you're going, left or right, for real. I mean, after this roller coaster of, just the season and everything that happened right behind each other, it seemed like it was blow after blow after blow after blow. But this is just kind of like, all right, cool. We may be all right. It may take a second, but I think this may help us be where, just changing the vision and direction of the team, man. So I'm actually kind of excited about it to see how it goes.
Love
No
it.
doubt.
Thank you, Bam.
Yeah.
Appreciate the call. Bam can sleep.
It's
a good thing.
Bam is getting some namaste there. And that's the thing. I think the defensive side of the ball is the biggest question in terms of what connections he's going to use to hire a defensive coordinator. Do they keep anybody from the current staff on that defense? Because I'll be the first to say there's some really good pieces on that defense right now. Even Lori Locust. I love Lori. Yeah. I feel like, she's somebody who has really brought another perspective to that outside linebackers room. We talked about Terrell Williams. He's getting some opportunities, getting an interview as a defensive coordinator up in Chicago. Could he be somebody who they possibly promote here? I think that's something you have to keep in mind. As much as you need to improve this offense, and now you've got your offensive-minded head coach, you've got to make sure that this defense is going to be solid as well moving forward.
615-737-1045. Alonzo is in Ohio this morning. Next. What's up, Alonzo?
Good morning. How are you all doing today?
Good morning.
Man.
Hey, I'm excited about Callahan. Hopefully he can bring over his dad as well, family relationships,
Yeah.
But him being an outside help can get rid of that underdog mindset and establish an alpha dog mentality back to a winning culture. So I just want to say thank you for letting me call in and give my 2 cents.
Thank you, Alonzo. Appreciate the call.
Thanks, Lonzo.
I do think that's important, and that is what Ramon Foster has been preaching for years.
Thank you, Bird.
Whenever anybody would let Ramon Foster talk into a microphone with an illuminated red light, he has wanted to get rid of the underdog mentality. And honestly, guys, it's one of the things I really do like about Brian Callahan is he's spoken to media members in Cincinnati about the culture change that happened under Zach Taylor in Cincinnati. And if you go deep into this article that The Athletic wrote and Paul Dinner Jr. last night from Cincinnati, he actually references a 2017 Theo Epstein Yale University graduation speech. Theo Epstein, the former president of the World Series champion Chicago Cubs, who talks about, and I'm going really in the weeds here, but talks about this exact speech as something that was an influence on him and his idea of what an important culture looks like. And he references a rain delay players-only meeting in Cleveland in the middle of Game 7 of the World Series when the Cubs broke a 108-year drought.
I was there.
And talked about Jason Hayward, who had his worst season as a pro that year, an experienced player at 27 years old, leading a players-only meeting and encouraging Aroldis Chapman, who had just given up a home run, to send this game to extra innings. And essentially saying, leadership is the marriage of players who have withstood difficult life experiences and experiences within their own careers, while also changing the culture. And talks about bringing in Joe Madden, who said, instead of suit and ties when we fly, if you look hot, wear it, was the exact phrase that they use for wardrobe. And he talks about this entire thing. I went through this whole speech last night, and it's something that Cincinnati writers reference that is important to Brian Callahan is, we're going to change the culture and make Titans football fun again, I think is what he wants to do. And it's not going to be suit and tie. It's going to be like what Theo Epstein says of, if you look hot in it, then wear it, essentially. While at the same time, marrying that with experienced players who have been through difficult experiences within this league. And that culture shift that happens in Cincinnati, I think that is why ultimately Brian Callahan's the guy.
No doubt. And, of course, there's always going to be the comparison of Vrabel to the new coach. Vrabel era versus this new era. And it's always going to come up. And when you look at this hire, too, I asked a couple of my sources last night, and one of them's been on this show and also exclusively worked in the AFC North, and it's Aditi Kinkhabwala. It was one of the things I asked her. I was like, so do you think this is a total opposite move from Vrabel? And it's like, he's friendly, open, so that it's not like Vrabel, but the players will like him and relate to him in that way. And also one of the other things that was said about him, too, is he's a guy that's patient but thorough, a real teacher, more about the players than anything, or more about the players than anything. Credit or attention he gets, doesn't care about it. And, of course, you throw in the fact that his dad is one of the better O-line coaches in the NFL, if not the best right now, and that's to be seen how he builds his staff and if his dad is a part of it, too. But we've heard the same sentiments be said, don't care who get the credit. Set guys up for success themselves. Is thorough, is loose, but also very concerned and strict about how he wants to operate. Those are the things that you want to hear. Again, his job more than anything now isn't the primary job of the OC unless he consumes that job himself, right? It would be more or less how he sets this team up for success. I don't think we can understand how important that is until we see it. And, of course, got to deal with the draft, got to deal with building the staff, got to deal with changing the culture and the mindset. Again, we don't want a conversation, somebody biting kneecaps or anything like that. But I think if we ask this fan base, listen to Bam, listen to Alonzo, you want the structure of how this team has been moving along to somewhat change the identity of it. And it may be looking at the way Detroit was being built and they went 3-13, whatever their record was in his first year. I don't think that's going to be the case here because you got to somewhat compete and you already got your quarterback and some of the stuff built up. But it will be a process still is where I'm at with all of this.
Yeah, I think most people we're hearing from are happy about the hire right now. And, of course, has to be made official. Probably going to be happening in the next 24 hours. But this is a situation where it's not going to, you're going to snap your fingers, everything's going to be fixed this next season. Now, I greatly am on the boat of it's going to improve. And I think that this team, with free agency, with the draft, with the money, can really improve this team and make it a team that can compete in the AFC South, possibly could be a playoff team. I mean, that's the most you could ask for maybe in a turnaround like this. But at least, Brian Callahan has been through this. He's seen what it's like to have to kind of rebuild an organization. And look, the culture is not dead here, folks. Let's remember that. There will be a new culture under Brian Callahan because he will be the head coach. But the culture is not dead here. Like the players aren't rioting in the streets. The players aren't trashing the organization. That's not what's happening here, even when Mike Vrabel left. So it's not like you're really having to rebuild in terms of the culture and the product and all of that. There's still some of that there with the players that are here. Now you got to bring in good players to add to that and bring in your philosophy as a head coach. And I'm interested to see what that will be from Brian Callahan. But I think it's great that he's seen it before. He's grown up with it, being his dad in Bill Callahan. He's seen the ups and downs of coaching, even as a kid, right? And when you are a football guy like that, like he eats, breathes, and sleeps football. I mean, that to me is the best type of like in game, in whatever you want to call it, experience you can get is when you're around it your whole life and you've seen it happen. And you've been with an organization where you've had to kind of help build it up.
And I guess just to correct the culture that I've used, change expectations.
Sure. Yeah.
Expectations.
I mean, not to interrupt you, sorry, but
No, go ahead.
there's going to be so much turnover over the last 2 years. I think the past culture is gone. I mean, I think this is a total reset, honestly.
Are you saying it? We've already said it as a show.
I mean, you're in a rebuild when you hire a new coach, right? But, I mean, when we look at what Derrick Henry had to say with Kevin Byard about how they came in the locker room this year and it felt different from the first day of training camp, I think the culture reset is underway. I think everything we knew is gone. And this is something completely new that is going to be more forward-thinking, more cutting edge, and more what everyone else in the NFL is doing.
Yeah. It's important, too. Again, look at around you, all around you in the AFC South. Let's just go there first. New head coach and new quarterback in Jacksonville, although they've been together for a little while. New head coach and quarterback in Houston, even though, no, this is the first year and they won it. And then, of course, look at Indy. They got their quarterback who's coming off of IR at some point.
615-737-1045. Arthur is in Franklin up next. Hey, Arthur.
Hey, guys. Just wanted to get your thoughts on Brian Callahan's experience, what kind of offensive scheme we should expect with him coming in, given the other coaches he's worked under. And then also just wanted to refresh my memory. Is his dad the Raiders coach that went to the Super Bowl against John Gruden the year after they traded him? And I'll get your thoughts and hang up. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate the call. Bill Callahan is his dad, the current offensive line coach of the Cleveland Browns and the Raiders head coach from 2002 to 2003. So that is correct. And Brian has worked with John Gruden as well. And it's funny, an old piece of The Athletic in 2018 said that John Gruden always had a list of names if he ever got out of broadcasting and back into coaching on who he would bring with him. Brian Callahan was on that list without even knowing it and got a call from John Gruden. Hey, I want you to come help coach Derek Carr and come coach quarterbacks. And he did. And then Derek Carr threw for 4,000 yards under John Gruden and Brian Callahan in Oakland at the time.
Wow. Big time stuff, just to tell you about his mind, too. And I ended up reaching out to another guy that had a deep piece with Brian Callahan. His name is Kevin Clark. He does a lot of stuff for The Ringer, ESPN, and other people, too, around the world. And I asked that same question, too. What is the difference? Or is this a 180-degree hire from Vrabel, in his opinion? And he's had the interview with Coach Callahan, and he said this. I think both are blunt. Speaking about Vrabel and also Coach Callahan, I think they're both blunt and honest communicators. They're both funny, direct guys with interest in the outside world who will be good at leading the organization. If there's a difference, it's at the quarterback position. Callahan is awesome at giving Burrow a ton of options. They basically had to come up with a different game plan every week because of how defenses played him, and Callahan was on top of it. In my opinion, I think this is a QB-driven hire. I think that's important, too. If for anything, you know he's going to pour in as much as he possibly can. And if he has a reputation of building quarterbacks and help mature them, right? If we get to year 3 or year 4 and Will Levis hasn't improved much, then you know what you have. Mm-hmm. You got to move forward, right? But you can trust the process that he's at least attempted to exhaust all avenues when it comes down to building this team up, surrounding the quarterback first. More than anything.
And that was the thing. I mean, Mike Vrabel, I think we do know one thing about him, and I still think he was a good coach, but I think one thing about him is that he was stubborn in the way that he was set in doing things he wanted to do. And I think sometimes that maybe hurt the moving forward of this offense because, you know, whether it be his guy and Tim Kelly, and I know the offensive line was an issue this year and you couldn't do much behind it. So we didn't see as much out of Tim Kelly as maybe we would have liked to have seen. But it seems like he just couldn't do enough to move it to the next level. And that's why it was so important, I think, for them to hire an offensive-minded guy in the fact that Will Levis needs to continue to develop. Like, he can be really good in this league, I think, but he needs someone to help him get there. And while I think Charles London has helped with that like development this last year, it needs to translate into game situations, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think this is a home run hire. Look at the list of quarterbacks he's worked with and had success with. It tells you right there.
In a 2018 article in The Ringer, Kevin Clark writes about a saying that Peyton Manning had in Denver that Brian Callahan has taken to heart and taken with him everywhere that he has been. A saying that goes, they can't play like that. We can't let them play defense like that. If they're going to play like that, we're going to teach them a lesson. And we'll link this article coming up here in just a minute on Twitter at Ramon Kayla Will. It's an excellent piece by Kevin Clark as he sits in the Cincinnati Bengals offensive meeting rooms during training camp after their trip to the Super Bowl and gave clarity as to why Brian Callahan is as smart of an offensive mind as there is in the NFL. And he talks about pressure routes that Cincinnati was running against Kansas City week 17 of 2022. In that game, we all watched and cheered for the Bengals in hoping that the Bengals would win and give the Titans the number 1 seed. And that's exactly what happened, obviously, a couple of years ago in 2022. So you've got Tyler Boyd, who is running 10 to 12-yard speed outs, and Daniel Sorensen, the Chiefs' deep safety, was not in position to get to the sideline. There's a space on the other side where Jamar Chase is running a decoy route, as Kevin Clark tells it, as they talk about this in the meeting room. And Joe Burrow comes back to the sidelines and tells Brian Callahan, tells the offense, he's not getting enough width on the backside. And Zach Taylor calls this a run for the love of the game route, essentially. If you watch Treylon Burks' routes in Miami, you are familiar with running for the love of the game, right? Occupying a safety on the backside of trying to get a safety or a linebacker or a corner and manipulating coverages to get one guy open, your primary guy. So Brian Callahan in this piece talks about how Joe Burrow doesn't say a lot on the sideline, but when he does, he is adamant. And that this was one of those times. And Brian Callahan is in the conversation where Joe Burrow asks, run that play again, do the same thing. Jamar, you continue to run like you're jogging and running a decoy, and I'm going to throw it to you. The result, a 69-yard touchdown for the Cincinnati Bengals in a Week 17 win over the Kansas City Chiefs. Sorensen didn't make it to the backside. Chase, instead of jogging, was wide open. The rest is history. The Titans were the number 1 seed, and the Cincinnati Bengals marched on to the Super Bowl. It's things like that, to me, guys, that impress me the most about Brian Callahan. It's the willingness to listen to your players, make adjustments accordingly, and not be stubborn and married to your ideas being the most important ideas in the room. And understanding, look, if my quarterback is seeing something, if my wide receivers are seeing something, there are countless stories in this. So we're going to link the article that Kevin Clark wrote in The Ringer on August 18th, 2022. He is listening to his players and understanding what they are seeing and making adjustments in game on the fly. That, to me, is something I don't think the Titans had enough of under Mike Vrabel. 615-737-1045. Tom Pelissero has spoken this morning on NFL Network, giving more clarity to Brian Callahan's first move as head coach of the Tennessee Titans. We'll play you the audio of one thing we might be learning about something Brian Callahan will be doing coming up next.
It's Ramon Foster for Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical, man. Hiller's one of those companies, man, I'll tell you this first, that made it easier for you to book and get in contact with them. If you need anything done around your house, whether it be plumbing, heating, cooling, or electrical, go to happyhiller.com first, okay? Because here's the thing about them. You can trust everything else that they do. They've been in business since 1990, and they are family-owned and operated. They also live by a creed, man, and that's 100% satisfaction. They live by happy you'll be or the service is free. If a customer isn't pleased with the work performed in their house, they will make it right, okay? They have professional, experienced, trustworthy technicians that come to your house and leave it better and cleaner than when they found it. You ask your question, well, how do they do that? Well, if you need something fixed on your house, they're going to make that happen, so that's better. They also walk in your house with covers on their shoes so they don't dirty it up. This is a company you can trust, whether that be plumbing, heating, cooling, or electrical. Go to happyhiller.com.
RKW is brewed up by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone. 615-737-1045 is our number. New reporting this morning from our teammate Buck Rising, who takes over, of course, immediately after we are done at 10 o'clock. A2Zsports.com, where you can read about the first move Brian Callahan is expected to make as the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, that he will likely call plays himself on the offensive side of the ball.
It's big time.
How do we feel about that?
I feel good about that. I think he's waited his time in Cincinnati under Zach Taylor. From what my source told me a few weeks ago when this came out, was that he is heavily and expressed heavily involved in the game planning week to week. And so much so that I think he has a part of the play calling ability, right? He's not technically calling the plays, but he's a part of that planning in doing so. So I think he's waited 5 years under Zach Taylor, learned a little more, built up a little more confidence in himself as a play caller to be able to finally get those duties. And so I'm actually all for it. And if this is his offense, if this is his team and he's part of this rebuild, then why not have him call the plays? And honestly, if you lose an offensive coordinator then, because he's the next best thing, then at least you know he's the one calling the plays, right?
Mm-hmm. The exact words written by Buck Rising and A2Zsports.com. The former Bengals offensive coordinator's first moves in Tennessee will be heavily scrutinized. Fixing the Titans offense requires more than just Callahan's arrival. Whom the new coach brings in to assist him in that mission will be as important as Callahan's hire itself. Buck writes, keep an eye on Panthers offensive coordinator Thomas Brown, which again we spoke about in the opening hour of the show in case you missed it. Tennessee is interested in bringing Brown in the same role to help Callahan implement his system, according to team sources to our Buck Rising. It is Buck's understanding, as he writes, that Callahan, quote, plans to be the Titans play caller as well as their head coach, setting up a system like the one in Cincinnati between Callahan and Bengals head coach Zach Taylor will be the objective, end quote.
That's kind of how that's what I thought. Essentially, you've learned from the guy that taught you to do the exact same thing, and your job is to mentor people behind you so that they understand. If it is Thomas Brown and Kayla, and they bring him in, that's smart. That gives him more experience. That gives him a new flavor as far as his career path go and how it operates too. He's been in this situation for 5 years in Cincinnati, essentially, being the guy behind the guy. This is his opportunity to prove himself. I don't think there's much pressure in it. I don't, for a guy like him coming to Nashville with this team and how low the offensive production has been. You look at this and just kind of say to yourself, it's appropriate. I understand it. But, of course, him surrounding himself with the staff that can keep the machine rolling too is going to be super essential. If it is him and Thomas Brown at some point, Thomas having a good bit of the weekly duties and having a strong defensive coordinator too, is going to be huge because it will somewhat operate in the business of two separate teams. He'll have a whole lot on his plate as a primary play caller, as Brian Callahan is going to be assumed to take that role. So having a defensive be his own team that can operate on his own has to be important. That move right there of defensive coordinator and special teams coach too, I ain't going to say you can't miss on it, but it needs to be a strong pick.
Yeah, and I think, one thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of youth, like even Thomas Brown, if he is the guy that's the OC, I mean, he's young too. I think like 36 or so. One thing that I hope that gets established on this team too is some sort of a veteran presence on both sides of the ball, right? Yeah. To have some coaches, and I know there will be, but to have some coaches that have, the time put into the league, they maybe have, especially on the defensive side, a little bit more experience. I hope that staff is evened out. I love all the bright young minds, but I want to make sure too that there are some guys, and I hope there are, that have that presence of experience.
Yeah.
Tom Pelissero of NFL Network and NFL Media confirmed what Buck Rising is reporting on A2Zsports.com this morning. Brian Callahan will call plays for the Titans.
got their guy. Their new head coach is the Bengals offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan, who had a second interview with the team on Monday, and they did not let him out of the building. As much as the NFL in recent years has tried to slow down the process, encourage teams to do additional interviews, this felt like what the NFL hiring process was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Callahan was supposed to be on a plane Monday night for a second interview on Tuesday with the Panthers. He also had a second interview set up on Wednesday with the Falcons. Well, Callahan never got on that plane. The Titans were able to get the deal done with the guy they had identified very early in the process as somebody they believed could revive that offense and work with their young quarterback, Will Levis, as well. Callahan was the son of longtime NFL coach Bill Callahan, has worked with some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, guys like Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, most recently Joe Burrow, as well as Peyton Manning, who, when Callahan was a young assistant in Denver, said, this is back in 2016, that guy's going to be an offensive coordinator, maybe even a head coach someday. Manning has been a big advocate for Callahan, who didn't call the plays in Cincinnati. My understanding is he will call the plays in Tennessee, a big-time hire for the Titans.
There's Tom Pelissero of NFL Network this morning on their airwaves, giving more clarity and confirmation to what Buck Rising is saying. Brian Callahan will call plays as the Tennessee Titans head coach on offense. 615-737-1045, our number. There is added speculation about a potential defensive coordinator fit. We'll get to that coming up in just a few minutes. A New York reporter has one name in mind of a longtime defensive coordinator who who has worked with Brian Callahan in the past in Denver. More on that coming up. Your phone calls at 615-737-1045 as Hour 3 begins next.
What's going on? Just about 8 o'clock. Good morning from the 104.5 The Zone Studios. I'm Robert Walsh. The Titans got their guy. Brian Callahan is the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Callahan was previously a quarterback coach with the Lions, the Raiders, and the Bengals before the Bengals promoted him to OC in 2019. A few quarterbacks Callahan has worked with in his tenure with those teams: Joe Burrow, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, and Peyton Manning. Now the Titans are primed and ready to start putting their staff together. Some potential staff additions include Thomas Brown, who interviewed to be the head coach as well, Bengals quarterback coach Dan Pitcher, and potentially his father, who's the offensive line coach in Cleveland, Bill Callahan. For all your foundation repair and waterproofing needs, visit USSTN.com. Breaking news at once on your home for the Titans and the Vols. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Second half of the show in hour number 3 on RKW. We are brewed up by 8th and Roast, discussing the only news there is to discuss this morning in Nashville. Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan is reportedly the pick by Rand Carthon, Amy Adams Strunk, and the Tennessee Titans organization. We'll hear from a Cincinnati radio host who knows exactly what Brian Callahan has been doing leading the Bengals offense. Mo Edgar will join us afternoons on ESPN 1530 in Cincinnati, also on 700 WLW and ESPN Radio. We'll get the local perspective on the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans coming up at 8:20 in just about 20 minutes. 615-737-1045. That's where we take your phone calls and your reaction as well in the F&M Bank chats, which is open and active this morning on 104.5 The Zone TV, Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch.
Twitch, please.
Thank you, Robert
There you
Walsh.
go.
Ramon Foster, I guess, making a pot of coffee or playing hacky sack in the parking lot. Your pick.
He's in the former offensive line room.
There you go. 615-737-1045. Interesting stuff a few minutes ago from Art Stapleton on Twitter, out of New York, covering the New York Giants for USA Today Network, Record Sports. There's Ramon. He has graced us with his presence once again. That's 5 demerits. 10 points will be subtracted from Gryffindor.
I owe you. Well, you've already taken away from my betting odds already, so there's always that.
Hey, you agreed to that, son.
NFL New York Giants beat writer Art Stapleton writes on Twitter 23 minutes ago, I won't be surprised if Wink Martindale surfaces as defensive coordinator candidate with the Titans now that Brian Callahan is tabbed as head coach. Wink and Callahan were together in Denver in 2010. Still NFC East rumblings for Wink in Philadelphia, Washington, and Dallas if Dan Quinn leaves for a head coach job. The game of musical chairs continues. And the second Wink Martindale would be hired, he would start blitzing.
You doggone right.
Bring me the blitz.
Yeah, you doggone right he will. Smart move also. Gentleman has been around the league for a while. You're going to need that type of experience and guidance. A second ago, we spoke at the end of the 7 o'clock hour about, hey, if Coach Brian Callahan takes over play calling, right, then he has his own business to run on the offensive side of it, on top of managing everything else. You need a strong leader on the other side of the ball. I don't know if it's going to be Don Wink Martindale or whoever it's going to be, but it has to be someone that has this level of experience. It can somewhat be a compliment to what this team needs defensively. You got to also think about the players that you have on this roster that are going to be your guys anyway. We're talking about Jeff. We're talking about Harold. We're talking about Amani, a few other guys on this team. And if you decide to bring back, of course, Aziz or whoever the case may be, like what type of players is he going to need too, and how he's going to communicate and operate on a day-to-day basis with the head coach who's also calling plays. We're talking about training camp, OTAs, mini camp, and everything else. Like this is an iron sharpen iron type of situation when you're basically going to have, I don't want to say 2 head coaches, but you're going to have your DC going against the head coach of your team every single day in practice. So that communication and respect has to be there. If it's Wink Martindale, to me, I think it's smart for the experience.
Yeah, I'm all for somebody with experience defensively if you're going to bring in a coordinator, and he has familiarity with Wink Martindale, so I love that. Like, he's crossed paths with him when he was in Denver. Wink has been also in Baltimore as a linebackers coach. He was the defensive coordinator from 2019 to 2021, and then most recently with the New York Giants. So this is a guy who's clearly been with some organizations, had certain roles, and looks to have a relationship with Brian Callahan. And then, like you said, 60 years old, he has the veteran type of presence I think you'd need somewhere on that defense. Just because that's the side of the ball I think we're now going to wonder, how does it get built up?
At Ramon Kayla Will, where you can interact with the show on Twitter. Give us a follow there while you go to our Twitter poll this morning, which we put out last night. Got 1 hour left still to vote in that. What do we think of head coach Brian Callahan? Approve or disapprove? 93% of voters approve of this hire.
Wow.
I think this is the hire, maybe other than Bobby Slowick, that in the court of public opinion is going to be most liked. And honestly, you could make the argument that this is maybe even more liked, or at least equally liked as Bobby Slowick. Kayla picked this as her first pick a couple of weeks ago. Ramon yesterday called that this was going to happen within the next 24 to 72 hours, and I make a mean cup of coffee.
There we go.
I'm just here so I won't get fined.
You do good.
I'll leave the predictions to you guys. I'll just continue brewing that new French Wave 8th and Roast, which you can go buy and get your own at one of their 4 locations this morning. 8th Avenue, Charlotte, the airport, or the Broadview at Vanderbilt.
Say what you want to about this process, too, and the predictions and everything that we've kind of see unravel when it comes down to this hiring process with Coach Brian Callahan. This is apparent to me. Ms. Amy and Rand and everybody that's included in the big decision-making knew what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. The fact that you didn't allow him to go take other interviews, the fact that you ended up making sure your interview process was thorough and quick, and they did cast a wide net. But in the closing moments of trying to secure Brian Callahan, they did that. The fact that you sent the plane to Cincinnati to bring him down here to close the deal lets you know how Miss Amy thinks about him, what Rand thinks about him, anybody else that's involved in this process, Burke Nihill, whoever you want to name that has that type of power and influence, said that's our guy and we're going to go get him. Mm-hmm. I think confidently, you got to say to yourself, I feel good about this. Again, he was at the top of a lot of other people's hiring lists, too.
Yeah.
And there's other people, like you mentioned, Slowick, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, a bunch of other guys that had conversations about being the head coach of this team, and they were aggressive. Say what you want to about Miss Amy letting go of Coach Vrabel. She was just aggressive as finding this next guy as letting go of him. So the idea that you need to move in a better, more fluid direction, this is somewhat refreshing to make this type of aggressive move. How it shakes out in the end, you deal with whatever the case is going to be at the wins and losses, right? But to say that's our guy, and not only just that, a lot of people wanted this guy too. We've yet to see Ben Johnson get hired yet. Bobby Slowick may go back to Houston, right? And then, of course, Aaron Glenn, like, this is the person that others wanted because of probably shared interests of other people to stay at other places, or the Carolina job might have just been that bad, too.
There's the hot names, and then there's the names that come with so much backing. And I feel like Brian Callahan, slowly in this process, I think people started to really figure out who he was. But at first, I don't think he was the hot name that was jumping off the page. Mm-hmm. The more and more you dove into his resume, the more and more that you reached out and started to hear from people in the league, his players, there is not one person that I've talked to or that I've seen articles written about Brian Callahan that say anything but he is a stand-up dude, he is a leader of men, he's a football-minded guy, and he's not going to be perfect, and not everything he does here is going to be perfect. But if there's that much good about a guy that's out there on the market as a potential head coach, it was damn smart of Amy Adams Strunk to pick him up and to get him while she could, because you can't let something like that go, in my opinion.
615-737-1045. Mike in Cleveland next up on the phone line. Say, Mike. Perfect.
What up?
There we go.
You have the floor.
Hey, will you pick up Bill Callahan on your way, by the way?
Man, hey, he can sit in the back. I got the bed for him, the pillow. I'm fluffing it for him. I'm about to go get him real quick. All right, I got you. But yeah, man, that's what I'm calling for. Look, I was happy. Let me tell you, I'm riding around, trying to dodge these ice, and I'm happy with the hire. And y'all getting me too hyped. Y'all are getting me so hype about this man. I got to contain myself. What I need y'all to do is just said, KK, what don't he do perfect, man? Because tell me something. He got a hangnail. He doesn't play ping pong well. He farts too much on the sideline. Tell me something that he don't do good, because y'all got me. Don't have me this hype all season, and then we gonna lose the first 2 games. That's all I'm saying, man. Y'all got me too hype on this road. So yeah, man, I'm very happy with the hire. I appreciate Miss Amy. I appreciate this hire. Also, hey Will, I just want to let you know, brother, I got a new single coming out February the 2nd. You can find it on all streaming platforms. And just Mike, that's just MIC. It's February the 2nd. All right, that's what's up, y'all. Deuces.
Get out of here,
I love how
man.
he gets that drop in.
The spirit moved.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
Let's get Chris in Nashville in before we go to break and get to Mo Egger on the other side. What's up, Chris?
Hey, guys. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Hey, I got a question and then a quick statement. So my question is, do we feel that we have more leverage in keeping DeAndre Hopkins now, the Callahan hire, and are we more optimistic as a fan base with Traylon Burks? And then my statement is I'm going to focus a little bit more on my 4-year-old daughter gymnastics class every week. She is starting to perfect her cartwheel. I do believe Will had said yesterday if Titans fans are lucky enough to get Callahan, they should all be doing cartwheels. And Will, I'm going to take your advice. I think I'm going to do a lot of stretching, calisthenics, and I'm going to work on my cartwheel. I'm going to have my daughter try to help me with that. I haven't did a cartwheel in 20 years, so I'll tell you how it goes. Hope I don't pull a hamstring.
Chris, I have not done a cartwheel in 26 years, and I'm 26 years old. So you just let me know when and where I need to be there, and if you'd like orange slices and whatever kind of juice boxes that I can bring for us all to share.
Yeah, I see punch and Kinesio.
Perfect. I'm there. Chris in Nashville. Thank you. The question on DeAndre Hopkins, I have no way of knowing.
And Burks
too. I don't think there's any way we can know. There are not really a ton of connections between DeAndre Hopkins and Brian Callahan. That is going to be decided over the next couple of months. I don't want to speculate because I don't think there's any way we can know what DeAndre Hopkins is thinking at this point in his career with a first-year head coach. Yes, it's an offensive mind, but does he want to go somewhere like Derrick Henry that's closer to winning a Super Bowl before he retires?
And just to piggyback real quick off of because of Mike's comment too, our job is to inform you guys on all things we've heard, read, and found out about Coach Callahan. How hype you get, okay, is to your own feelings, okay? What you see in the preseason and what the reports are about your new head coach. If they go 2-0 or 0-2 or 10-0. That's on the performers on the field. Don't blame us for how you feel.
We have said that.
We are just information deliverers, okay?
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
It's also fair to say that we have said this first year with Callahan, there's going to be some bumps in the road.
Yeah.
Warning.
We got time to talk about that. This is a day of happiness.
But,
don't talk yourself down.
Hey.
Yeah. But I'm excited for what he can do for Burks. He's dealt with numerous really good wide receivers, all shapes and sizes, from Jamar Chase to T. Higgins to Tyler Boyd, right? They've dealt with it. So I would expect him to be able to cultivate a plan to incorporate Traylon Burks more. What D-Hop does is probably going to depend upon the check and his communication with Coach Callahan.
I even think Kyle Phillips may be under him.
And what T. Higgins, what he wants in a jersey number when he comes back home. Now I'm trolling. 615-737-1045. Cincinnati radio host Mo Egger is on afternoons at ESPN 1530 in Cincy and on 700 WLW. He will join us next to give us the local perspective on the Titans' new reported head coach. You won't want to miss his insight Into Brian Callahan next.
When it comes to large home repairs, a lot of the time we homeowners pretend we don't see the warning signs. We're afraid of what we're going to hear. This is especially true with waterproofing and foundation repair. It can be something big that needs to be fixed right away, or it could be a small problem now that'll become bigger later, or it may be nothing at all. Bottom line is we don't know, and we certainly don't want to be sold something we don't need. We need a peace of mind, and United Structural System is the company to give you that. They have over 25,000 100% satisfied residential customers, and here's how they make that happen. When USS comes out to your house, you're going to get a problem solver who provides the peace of mind to the customer. That's you, the homeowner. You're not going to get someone who's worried about meeting a sales quota or upselling the next big thing, but someone there to educate you, help you understand what is happening with your home. At USS, the only measure of success is how satisfied the homeowner is and not a closing ratio. That's why homeowners trust USS, keeping homes dry and stable for over 25 years. USS, serving Middle Tennessee, Southern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, and Northern Alabama. You can reach them online at 615-488. Oh, I'm sorry. You can reach them online at USSTN.com or call them at 615-488-7855.
RKW is brewed up by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone, and the Titans reportedly have their head coach. With Ramon Foster and Kayla Anderson, I'm Will Bowling. Robert Walsh, our producer. We get the local perspective right now, courtesy of Mo Edgar. Afternoons on ESPN 1530, also on 700 WLW and ESPN Radio, giving us the perspective on the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans. What's up, Mo? How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. What's going on?
Good morning.
Man, just a little bit to talk about here in Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan being the Titans' reported pick. What can you tell us about a guy who is very well spoken of by a lot of the best quarterbacks around the league? And from Zach Taylor, for a guy who has not called plays, Mo, it sounds like Brian Callahan has still had a very big role in this Cincinnati offense.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think you start with Joe Burrow's rookie season. You know, it was the weirdness of COVID, and as great as Joe was in college, as terrific a talent as he is, you know, it's not easy to be a rookie quarterback asked to start week one in the NFL. It's even more difficult when you have to learn the offense from your parents' couch in Athens, Ohio. It was the weirdness of that entire offseason, right, where they had to do everything virtually. Training camp was weird. There were no preseason games, and yet I think the coaching staff and Brian Callahan had a big hand in this, did a great job of getting Joe ready to go week one, and he played more than capably in his NFL debut. And so I think of that. I also think of, and Titans fans saw this, the year the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. They got there in spite of a dreadful offensive line. And I don't think the offensive coaching staff got enough or gets enough credit for, on a weekly basis, designing game plans knowing the offensive line was going to be a major deficiency. You guys saw it in the playoff game that year where the Titans sacked Joe Burrow 9 times. It completely neutered their explosiveness. But I think the coaching staff did a good job of designing functional game plans around that bad offensive line. I think that says a lot about Brian Callahan. I also think this past season, look, they had to play a huge chunk of the season with a backup quarterback who had never played in an NFL game, in Jake Browning. And he was more than functional toward the end of the season. I think Brian Callahan's work had a hand in that. So I think you will see. He didn't call plays. But I think if you look at some of their greater offensive successes, I think you'll see Brian Callahan's fingerprints all over the place.
Mo Edgar, ESPN 1530 in Cincinnati, our guest. And Mo, Amy Adams Strunk has been clear in what she wants in a head coach and someone who can collaborate with new general manager Rand Carthon. And that was part of Mike Vrabel's undoing, of course, that's been reported, was his say on personnel control and wanting the final say in a lot of that. And a guy like Brian Callahan, who has been a lot of places and who understands the way the culture was changed in Cincinnati, what has worked in the culture shift in Cincinnati that you feel like Brian Callahan, as just a culture builder, will bring here in his collaborative efforts with Rand Carthon?
Well, the first thing they did is they drafted Joe Burrow.
That helps.
You know, it starts with that. But no, I mean, look, if you look at when this staff took over, remember, Marvin Lewis had been here for 16 years, and there were a lot of holdovers from Marvin's regime over those first couple of seasons. And I think the coaching staff did a very good job of rebuilding the culture here, even though there were some guys who weren't completely on board. And I think, you know, that sort of spreads across the roster. It's been a marked shift, you know. I think just in terms of the Bengals having a bunch of guys who are more committed to playing for each other and with each other than what they had with the previous regime. And a lion's share of that credit is going to go to Zach Taylor, the head coach. I think they've done a very good job of shifting how they pick players and moving away from, you know what, we're going to give a guy a second opportunity, even though he doesn't necessarily, other teams don't view him as being necessarily deserving of that opportunity. And I think they're more willing to just sort of say, okay, we're going to take a guy who is maybe not quite as talented, but is going to be a little bit more willing to buy into our system, maybe a little bit better at not getting in trouble off the field, maybe somebody who's a little bit more team-centric. I think the other thing, you know, the Bengals have gotten better, right? And getting better means guys are going to start to get paid. And they've had some guys who have not been, I think, privately thrilled with their contract status, as is the case when you have to pay everybody, including your quarterback. And yet it's never been an issue in terms of disrupting what they're trying to accomplish. You know, they had, and it's on the defensive side of the ball, but they had Jesse Bates go through an ordeal where for 2 years they couldn't get a deal done. He played under the franchise tag. He wasn't happy about it, but in those 2 seasons they won back-to-back AFC North titles. I think this staff as a whole has done a very good job of just keeping everybody focused on what the task at hand is, understanding that from the business perspective, there are going to be some decisions that the front office has to make and that players themselves have to make, but let's not allow those things to creep into what we're trying to accomplish on the field. And again, that starts with Zach Taylor, but I think you're being naive if you don't think the coaching staff by extension has had a major hand in all of that.
We're joined by Mo Edgar right now of ESPN 1530 out of Cincinnati. And Mo, I have to ask this question too because it's been said a lot of times that the ability that Brian Callahan has to be fluid from game plan to game plan, from quarter to quarter is something that this offense here in Nashville has been somewhat struggling from first half to second half or one game to the next. How have the players, if you've spoken to them, spoken about his ability to change up what they're doing in game and from week to week?
Well, I'll go back to the end of the season because the offense they were running with Jake Browning was different than the offense they were running with Joe Burrow. You know, Joe doesn't like to be under center. He likes to be in empty backfields. With Jake Browning, they had to shift on the fly, and suddenly they were running things out of, with him under center. They were running, sets. Heck, there were times they even had 2 running backs. It was like watching football in 1987. They have been pretty malleable, if you will, in terms of just being able to adjust to what they have. And again, the primary example that I will give you is, they're the best offensive line the Bengals have had since this regime took over was the one they had this past season. And it still wasn't a good offensive line. It was league average at best. And so I think when you're preparing for an opponent week to week, to know that we are kind of going into a game with one hand tied behind our back because we just don't have a bunch of guys up front who can move people. We don't have an explosive running back in a guy who's maybe a little bit more capable of hitting home run type runs than Joe Mixon is. And yet, they had the number 4 offense in the NFL in 2022. Obviously, the talent they have on the outside with Jamar Chase and with T. Higgins has a lot to do with that. But I think the other thing they've done is they've been able to take parts from other teams and slide them in and get a lot of use out of them. I think the way they used Hayden Hurst as a tight end in 2022 is an example of that. I think the way they created a role for C.J. Uzomah, and he had a season that enabled him to go get paid by the New York Jets in 2021. I think that's an example of that. I think they've been very good at adjusting on the fly, and I think more than anything, they've been really good at figuring out a way to thrive and at the very least function when they've had that deficient offensive line. That, to me, more than anything that this coaching staff has done, and Brian Callahan has been a big part of that, when you've got to figure out how to make your offense work and your quarterback is going to get hit a lot, that's not easy. And yet this staff and this team were able to do that to the point that they made consecutive AFC championship games.
The next question I have for you is about the management of the roster and management of the team and decision-making, right? The 2021 draft was, I think Cincinnati was in a position to where he could have taken Penei Sewell or Jamar Chase, and then they elected to choose Jamar Chase, and it was a great decision. But, of course, you mentioned the protection issues that Cincinnati's had over the last few years. His fan base has been they went through a reflection yesterday as it was the 2022 AFC championship game. Well, the divisional round against the Bengals where you guys beat the number 1 overall seed. And Joe Burrow got sacked 9 times, but you guys still won. Moving forward with him at the head coach position, do you see him addressing the O-line first, or do you have a guy who's offensive-minded that want more skilled players like a Jamar Chase instead of protection? Because they need it here in Nashville too.
Sure. Now, I think if you look at what they've done on the offensive line, it's not like they've ignored it, right? I mean, heck, they've signed Alex Kappa and Ted Karras and La'el Collins and Orlando Brown signed a massive deal last year. So I think, look, if you go back to the spring of 2021, they had Joe Burrow and they had T. Higgins, and they had an offensive line they knew needed fixing. But I think the thinking then was, we want to be elite at one position group. And we think if we draft Jamar Chase we will all of a sudden have this group of wide receivers that makes us great on the outside. And Jamar is going to give us explosiveness that automatically is going to sort of make over our offense. And then slowly but surely, we're going to get the offensive line fixed. And look, Penei Sewell has turned out to be a heck of a player. So it's not like, boy, they got it right with Jamar and Penei Sewell was a bum in Detroit. I think it's very reasonable to wonder, what would this offense look like if they bypassed Jamar Chase and took Penei Sewell? But for the purpose of what they were trying to accomplish, it worked. And I think they looked at the offensive line and said, well, we're going to be so good on the outside, and our quarterback is so good at making quick decisions, that in itself is going to keep him upright. Did it work to the degree that they would have liked? Well, no, because he once got sacked 9 times in a playoff game, and he got sacked 7 times in the Super Bowl. But they made the Super Bowl. And if you look at that draft in 2021, they did take a lineman in the second round. Unfortunately, he hasn't really worked out. I would imagine that the offensive team-building philosophy will remain the same, where they go, look, let's be great at this one area as quickly as possible. Maybe that's wide receiver. Maybe it is on the offensive line. But if that's what they did in 2021. They looked at what they had and said, let's be great at one thing. What can it be? What can it be? And with the addition of Jamar Chase, suddenly they had one of the best wide receiver groups in the NFL. And it did work, even if the offensive line build came very, very slowly and at a bit of a cost. Because, again, they're probably Super Bowl champs 2 years ago if they had a reasonably competent offensive line.
Mo Edgar of ESPN 1530 in Cincinnati joining us this morning on RKW. So, Mo, obviously Brian Callahan has been there 5 years under Zach Taylor. And I feel like a lot of head coaches, at least nowadays, that are offensive coordinators beforehand, leave a little earlier. What was the benefit, really, of him staying here this chunk of time? And what can he now use that in terms of being a head coach and a leader of men in his next spot as a head coach?
Well, I mean, it was pretty remarkable, right? I mean, the Bengals went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I guess. They went to the AFC Championship game. And yet, after all that success, they brought back the same exact coaching staff this past season. And we talked about it a lot going into the year. Like, man, you've got to take advantage of that continuity. And unfortunately for the Bengals this year, they couldn't do that. I think with Brian, first of all, I think for some teams there's just the stigma of, yeah, he's an offensive coordinator, but he doesn't call plays. I think that's sort of outmoded way of looking at things. I also think there's an unwillingness to look beyond the fact, well, they drafted Joe Burrow. And so, suddenly he's going to make everybody out to be smarter than they are. I think, the other thing is, it's not like this was the first time he interviewed for jobs. He interviewed in Denver. He's sort of made the rounds, if you will. I think there's always been a sense of it's a matter of when and not if he becomes a head coach. I've always been sort of interested in wondering, does he end up being a plan B for a team that doesn't get, obviously not a consideration in Nashville, but doesn't get Mike Vrabel or doesn't get Bill Belichick or doesn't get Jim Harbaugh. But, look, this is a guy who's grown up in the game. My understanding is he's going to bring his dad with him to be the offensive line coach, Bill Callahan, the former head coach of the Oakland Raiders. I've certainly read that. He has had, if you go to when this coaching staff took over, they were a punchline. And that first season with Zach Taylor, they were miserable, 2-14. I think Brian Callahan, if he's smart, and I think he is, not only did he have a hand in this franchise, becoming one of the better teams in the NFL, at least for a couple of years, he not only had a hand in it, I'm sure there were lots of things that he could grab from that experience that he could apply to his next job in Nashville.
Mo, the one question I think a lot of people have here is, since this is the first time he's putting together his own coaching staff, how many connections do you feel like, and I feel like he has a lot because of his dad and just because of how long he's been in Cincinnati and he's been in Denver, but for the defensive side of the ball, like how do you feel like he can reach out to some of the people to build his staff on that side?
Well, all I can do is tell you what it was like here, because the defensive coordinator in Cincinnati, Lou Anarumo, was, I think, had he said no, they were going to hire me. He was not very high on the list of candidates at the outset of the process when the Bengals were putting together a coaching staff. And, I remember when they hired Lou, he was the defensive backs coach of the New York Giants. There was this, real sense of, God, really him? And it took forever. The Bengals coaching staff that first season, they all had to introduce themselves to each other at the combine. That's how long it took. And so I'm not really sure that what happened here in hiring Lou Anarumo was the blueprint you want to follow. Now, fortunately, it's worked. And he's done a very, very good job with this defense and is somebody that I think deserves head coaching consideration on his own merits. But I don't know that the way the process played out here is what any team really wants to pattern themselves after, because it took a long time. A lot of the initial candidates either turned the job down or they just couldn't come to an agreement as to what employment would look like, or they didn't really mesh philosophically. I don't know that anybody wants to follow that here. That said, it does go to show that sometimes the obvious answers for who should be a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator for that matter often aren't the best ones, because nobody knew who Lou Anarumo was, and I happen to think he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. What they swing for, what they look for, if it's somebody with experience, if it's somebody who's going to be moving up a rung on the coaching ladder to go from a position coach to a defensive coordinator, I don't know. But I would hope for his sake, and I would hope for the sake of the Tennessee Titans, that the defensive coordinator hire and the overall assembly of the coaching staff doesn't take as long there as it did here. I think the other thing you have to remember is when the Bengals made the move from Marvin Lewis to Zach Taylor, it also happened very late because they had to wait for Zach Taylor to coach in the Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams. And so that staff, that first season, and they've all talked about it, they were really playing catch-up from day one. I think that was reflected by how the team played that first season. Obviously, that's not so much a consideration with the Titans getting the hire done pretty early in the process.
Good point.
Great stuff from Mo Egger, Cincinnati radio host, afternoons on ESPN 1530. And Mo, on the way out, man, you mentioned the Bill Callahan aspect of this. We know intimately well in Tennessee, sometimes the dark side of the Haslams getting involved in maybe too much in football at the University of Tennessee. Surely they wouldn't block someone going to coach with their son, right?
Well, it is the Haslams, and it is the Cleveland Browns, so I guess you never know. But I would imagine that if there's a way out of that, or if there's a way to get it done, that the Titans and the Callahans have figured out a way. But you're exactly right. If somebody could get in the way, I guess it's Jimmy Haslam.
It would be him. That's right. Great stuff from Mo Egger this morning at Mo Egger, EGGER on Twitter. Mo, thank you so much for the time. A quick turnaround from the news breaking last night. We really appreciate it.
No question. Anytime. You got it.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Thanks,
There's Mo Egger with us this morning here on RKW. And that note on Bill Callahan, especially interesting on the offensive line coach of the Cleveland Browns, potentially coming to Tennessee. We'll give you that audio if you missed it just a few minutes ago from Mo and his understanding that Brian Callahan intends to bring his dad with him. And that is a big, big positive for the Titans and a bad offensive line this past year. That's next on RKW. RKW is brewed up by 8th and Roast with a developing story this morning. Of course, developing last night was Brian Callahan's hiring by Amy Adams Strunk, Rand Carthon of the Tennessee Titans. 615-737-1045 is our number. We just talked with Mo Edgar, a radio host in Cincinnati, afternoons on ESPN 1530, who had this to say about Brian Callahan's dad joining the staff as well.
I think there's always been a sense of it's a matter of when and not if he becomes a head coach. I've always been sort of interested in wondering, does he end up being a plan B for a team that doesn't get, obviously not a consideration in Nashville, but doesn't get Mike Vrabel or doesn't get Bill Belichick or doesn't get Jim Harbaugh. But, look, this is a guy who's grown up in the game. My understanding is he's going to bring his dad with him to be the offensive line coach, Bill Callahan, the former head coach of the Oakland Raiders. I've certainly read that. He has had, if you go to when this coaching staff took over, they were a punchline. And that first season with Zach Taylor, they were miserable, 2-14. I think Brian Callahan, if he's smart, and I think he is, not only did he have a hand in this franchise becoming one of the better teams in the NFL, at least for a couple of years, he not only had a hand in it, I'm sure there were lots of things that he could grab from that experience that he could apply to his next job in Nashville.
So there's Mo Edgar, Cincinnati radio host. I think some of that just coming from as well the context of what he says, what he is reading, and what he is hearing. Obviously can't speak for the thought process behind that statement. But his words were, my understanding is that he will bring his dad with him. Cleveland Browns offensive line coach Bill Callahan. We followed up about that in the context of, hey, could the Browns block this? And he did say, yeah, you never know, right? And the Haslams do Haslam-like things every now and then when they run the Cleveland Browns and run that organization perhaps a bit differently than others. But seems positive that what we suspected will likely happen, that Bill Callahan's going to be the offensive line coach on Brian Callahan's first staff.
And my assessment looking up Brian Callahan is this: if you want to coach Munch, you get him Munch 2.0 in the way he's developed guys. Now, I did a little bit of research, and Bill Callahan. If you wanted Mike Munchak, Bill Callahan is Munch 2.0 or 1.0, however you want to look at it, or he's in his own circle, right? But I'm going to mention some names and some stuff he's done in his career, and you're probably going to say, well, those dudes are meant to be perfect or meant to be good. But here's the thing, too. It does take good coaches to get the best out of really good players. And it takes a good coach to get the best out of average players to you elevate everybody. So here's just some of the names and the track record that Bill Callahan has been able to do as far as the offensive line. Of course, he coached up Pro Bowlers Nick Mango, Alan Faniga, and DeBrickashaw Ferguson. All of those do multiple Pro Bowls, but it's not just that. In his time with the Jets, under that offensive line, they broke the franchise records for the Jets with 2,756 yards on the ground through 16 regular season games. They also led the NFL in rushing, an average 4.5 yards an attempt. And then, of course, he goes from that place to another place in Dallas, where he's helped coach up Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, Travis Frederick. And there's been multiple stops he's made, and almost every stop he's helped, at least on that side of it, elevate the offensive line. Those names are names you know. Those are the dudes that are the Pro Bowl, all-pro guys at all time. But you also have to know how to coach that talent up. Mm-hmm. And whether it be those three, if he had his hand on picking those guys, and each one of them, remember, I've always told you with a good old line, how many you need? 3. And if you get Peter, if you go get a first-round left tackle, whether that's Alt or whoever else, finding the next guys after that, this is a build-up to getting to that point. But he's delivered on his end of it as far as being an O-line coach.
Well, look what he did before DeJuan Jones got hurt up there. DeJuan Jones is a guy we saw had so much potential at the Senior Bowl. I mean, big dude.
Yeah.
Stepped in for Cleveland the beginning of the year before he got hurt. I thought he was doing a pretty good job.
Yep.
You can look to Bill has continued to kind of build guys like that. And he's a rookie that really, I don't think a lot of people expected to be in that position this year. Unfortunately that he got hurt, but I would have been impressed to see what he did the rest of the way.
Yep.
Brian Callahan has spoken about one of those Titans offensive linemen before. Last year on a Locked on Bengals podcast, this was in the pre-draft process a year ago, Brian Callahan was asked by the podcast host about the best offensive line prospects. And we have the audio for you of what he had to say. And he does mention one current Tennessee Titan who may or may not have been the first overall pick that they made.
Weird because I do think the tackle class is different than the last couple of years because there's not the high-end, surefire top 10 style tackles in this draft. There just isn't. Good players, guys are going to play for a long time, but the best lineman is still probably a guard, and that's the kid from Northwestern.
Oh, guard, I heard.
I did not hear tackle. Did you hear tackle there, Kayla?
I heard guard.
Ramon, what did you hear when Brian Callahan sang that? Did you hear Chance Formack level bust when you heard Brian Callahan speak about Peter Skoronski?
If y'all could see me on the video right now, my arms are crossed and I got this smug on my face.
Wait,
okay?
but guards play on the inside.
Guards play on the inside.
Yeah, they play next to the tackle.
He says some good guys, but not sure if they're stellar left tackles.
And he thinks Peter's a guard.
He said the dude from where?
Northwestern.
The dude.
That's in Chicago. Right?
Kayla, what position did he say he's going to play?
A guard.
He going to play where?
Guard.
No, Kayla, they said, this fan base said he's a tackle.
That's what the fan base said.
But what does this coach say?
Chat has told us he's a left tackle.
But people have been telling.
Hour 4 next. RKW brewed up by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone.
My friends at Genesis Diamonds are psyched for the new year, okay? Lots of great things are happening, and they are ready to help you celebrate those important milestones with better value, higher quality, uncompromising customer care. At Genesis, they have expanded their selection of exquisite hand-picked diamonds from a half a carat to you ballers out there, 15 carats, okay? All shapes, all sizes, all Genesis famous no middleman prices, okay? Genesis has lab-grown diamonds at the highest quality at prices way below what you see at other jewelers. They have also brought in even more exclusive designer jewelry, new cutting-edge fashion-forward rings, earrings, bands, bracelets, pendants, things you can't find anywhere else. And, of course, Genesis is proud to offer a truly spectacular collection of luxury pre-owned Rolex timepieces. They have all the most popular models in stock. So get the Genesis in 2024 and let the non-commissioned experts help you celebrate those important milestones. They guarantee the best value, the highest quality, and the strongest warranties and guarantees in the jewelry industry. Genesis Diamonds and luxury pre-owned Rolex timepieces.
What's going on? Good morning. 9 o'clock from the 104.5 The Zone Studios. I'm Robert Walsh. The Titans got their guy. Brian Callahan is the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Callahan was previously the quarterback coach with the Lions, Raiders, and Bengals before the Bengals promoted him to become their offensive coordinator in 2019. A few quarterbacks that Callahan has worked with his tenure over the couple years with those guys: Joe Burrow, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, and Peyton Manning. Now the Titans are primed and ready to start putting their staff together. Some potential additions include Thomas Brown, who also interviewed to be the head coach of the Titans, Bengals quarterback coach Dan Pitcher, and potentially his father, who coaches the offensive line in Cleveland. For all your foundation repair and waterproofing needs, visit USSTN.com. Breaking news at once on your home for the Titans and the Vols. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Fourth and final hour of the show starts right now, 9 a.m. in Nashville, and lots to talk about as the Tennessee Titans, as first reported by NFL Media's Tom Pelissero last night, reportedly have their head coach. Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan will be the guy. Who does he bring with him? Wink Martindale, one name that's been thrown out there by New York media. Mo Edgar of Cincinnati tells us 20 minutes ago his understanding is that Brian intends to bring his dad, Bill, with him. The offensive line coach of the Cleveland Browns, a big piece to a very large puzzle that we're putting together with you 4 hours every single morning. With Ramon Foster and Kayla Anderson, Robert Walsh, our producer. I'm Will Bowling. Streaming live on 104.5 The Zone TV, Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch.
Twitch, please.
What do you like the most about Brian Callahan? We've got an hour to take your phone calls at 615-737-1045. What is the biggest positive in the man that is now tasked to lead the Tennessee Titans in 2024 and beyond?
Biggest positive, again, for me, I'll tell you the fact that they've been around a situation like Cincinnati. And, you bring up the Marvin Lewis conversation again, and having to reconstruct that team. And essentially it's the same type of personality here. Coach Rabel wasn't here that long as Marvin Lewis was in Cincinnati, but he had his imprint on this team in a major, major way. So watching them turn Cincinnati around to where they're not just a laughing stock. Their mess-ups as of late has been because of injuries of QB1. Whether that be his elbow, shoulder, hand, whatever it was this past year, and ACL 2 years ago before that, and watching them turn into a team that was supposed to win the AFC North this year. And they just got derailed because of it. They're a team that's thriving at points and still surviving in others. You mentioned Jake Brown earlier, Kayla, too. You got this dude that nobody had really talked about at all. And now at the end of the season, they're showing his wife in the box the same way they did Taylor Swift. And she went from just wearing blue jeans to wearing an entire outfit with his name and number on it because they helped turn him into a star quarterback towards the latter part of the season. And I think, to me, when you look at that, that's probably one of his biggest moments right there as a working coordinator or construction worker to the Cincinnati offense.
Look, he's a guy who's put in the work. I mean, he's from a football background. He grew up with a dad who was a head coach, a coordinator for many teams across the league. He went to one of the most prestigious, De La Salle in California, in terms of a high school that has great program in terms of football. And then he's worked his way up, and he's been able to spend 5 years in Cincinnati learning behind a guy like Zach Taylor, collaborating with a guy like Zach Taylor. And I think he now has what it takes. He has the confidence, what it takes to be a head coach in this league. And I think he feels that confidence in himself to call the plays, what we're hearing. He's going to be the play caller. That is something he was heavily involved in his time in Cincinnati, in the game planning. And I know that that's a question mark that people have, but I think that it's now his time to be able to prove that he can be a play caller and a head coach in this league. Every single person we have talked to, and this is what makes me think this is what hit Amy Adams Strunk hard and would not let him leave that building is because everybody we spoke to says he is that leader. Like, he's that guy that knows when to be calm and go about his business, but also knows when to step in and be fiery. He's a really smart, methodical guy who has a good presence about him. That's one of the first quotes I got about him when he was a candidate for this team. This is a guy who has learned, and now he's going to have the ability to share everything that he's learned from his dad growing up, 5 years with the Bengals under Zach Taylor. So I like all of that. And then obviously working with every quarterback you can think of in terms of making them better. Matthew Stafford, Peyton Manning, he worked with in the Super Bowl year in Denver. And then, Joe Burrow, that speaks for itself. But Jake Browning, he helped develop that kid in a situation this year that nobody expect him to be a starter.
Brian Callahan has had 4,000-yard passers everywhere that he has been, including in Detroit as the quarterback's coach of the Lions when he worked with Matthew Stafford, in 2018 with Derek Carr as the guy in Oakland under head coach John Gruden, and then, of course, with Joe Burrow. And I think a couple of us in this room could help Joe Burrow to 4,000 yards. But it's not like a situation where Adam Gase was Peyton Manning's guy and helped a generational quarterback who's a top 5 quarterback of all time be a dude. This guy has mentored everyone from Tim Tebow to Andy Dalton to Matthew Stafford to a number of quarterbacks in this league. And it does feel like, Kayla, to your point, that you're getting the mix of the buzzword that hopefully we won't have to hear anymore for much longer in leader of men, while also getting the offensive guru. If you want both, Brian Callahan is that guy. And Bill, who his reputation precedes him of a loud, boisterous, aggressive personality. And Brian in interviews has said, I'm not exactly that. I'm not going to speak to my players in the way he gets his offensive linemen ready to go as they're taking their smelling salts and all these things. And you guys are crazy individuals, Ramon Foster.
That's okay.
You have to talk to Joe Burrow differently than you would talk to Orlando Brown.
That's true. I get you.
And there's a lot of fairness and truth to that. But I do think this is the best of both worlds. And NFLPA, 1,600 players, we talked about it earlier, voted on the top coordinators in the league on both sides of the ball. And NFLPA players, 1,600 people, not exactly a small sample size, ranked Brian Callahan as the number 4 offensive coordinator in the NFL. And on that list, you have Brian Schottenheimer, you have Frank Smith of the Miami Dolphins. You've got names that are being floated out there as offensive coordinator candidates around the league. Kellen Moore is a guy that has been in that mix as well. I think what sets Brian Callahan apart is the culture-building aspect of this. And when we had ESPN's Jeremy Fowler on the show last week, he told us the Aaron Glenn link makes sense because the Titans are interested in a culture builder. They want somebody to strip this thing down and recreate everything that's been in that locker room, in the front office, in Amy Adams Strunk's office, in meeting rooms with Burke Nihill. You get the sense talking to people around that building that they want to modernize everything that is happening at Ascension St. Thomas Sports Park. That starts in the locker room on a small-scale perspective with the head coach. It goes beyond that in the way the head coach relates to the general manager and the owner, Amy Adams Strunk. And that ultimately is why Brian Callahan's the pick by Amy and Rand as the new head coach in Tennessee. We take your phone calls for the rest of the show. 615-737-1045. Trevor is in Goodlettsville up next on the phone lines with us. What's up, Trevor?
Yeah, hey, so just a little history lesson. So there was one and only one unbendable rule in the Titans organization. It got Jeff Fisher fired, and that was the anti-nepotism policy. He hired his son, and they fired him. So why is that different now?
Well, I think Bill Callahan, as an offensive line coach, it's not like you're hiring him just because he's Brian Callahan's dad. You're hiring him because he's one of the better offensive line coaches in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think the difference is we got to look at the track record of one versus the other. I'm not sure what Coach Fisher's son's done, but I'm guessing it's not as much as what Bill Callahan has done in his career, too. And we're talking about position-specific also. We're talking about a dude that specializes in the offensive line. Nepotism is one thing for sure that a lot of businesses do not like whatsoever. But when it comes down to you looking at a person's track record, you got to somewhat enjoy what his is at that position specifically. there has been issues here with the O-line. If you have the opportunity to go hire a guy or pull somebody from somebody else's roster or staff, you take that move. Nepotism is one thing. If it's somebody that doesn't deserve a job, that's when we start talking about nepotism to me. We're talking about an older gentleman that has a track record of development, has a standard of organizing a game plan as far as the run goes in numerous places. I don't think we can correlate one to the other. This is a case-by-case situation to me. If it's my son and everybody know, man, look at Junior. Junior ain't did nothing in his life, right? Then we can start talking about nepotism. This isn't an unproven commodity here if he chooses to go hire his father.
Well, and I said that earlier, just in terms of you have to have some veteran presence on the staff that you're going to build. I mean, there are going to be some young guys. Brian Callahan is 39 years old. He's a first-time head coach. At some point in this staff building, you're going to have to start bringing some veteran guys on this staff. And it just so happens to be one of the best offensive line coaches there is, and it's his dad. Okay, cool. I don't think anybody's looking at that as nepotism. Or I just said that wrong.
Nepotism.
There we go.
Yep.
615-737-1045, our number. Coming up, more of what people around the league are saying about the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Mike Tannenbaum, former NFL executive, gave a grade on ESPN.com last night. We'll tell you what that is. We'll also take a look at an old story in The Athletic about when Brian Callahan was hired by John Gruden in Oakland. Some of his philosophies that he has carried to multiple places, even as far as 6 years ago when John Gruden got back in the league. We'll dive into that coming up next. RKW is brewed up by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone, 615-737-1045, our number. The coaches who did not get the Titans job, we could run through those headlines coming up here in just a moment and take your phone calls throughout our final hour here this morning, 615-737-1045. Aaron Wilson, KPRC2 in Houston. Sound like that's a Star Wars character.
Wow.
CP3O, whatever that is. I've not seen Star Wars, so I'm not the person to speak about this. Says that Bobby Slowick has second interviews for head coaching jobs with the Commanders and Falcons. Of course, before he was hired as the Titans coach last night, again, reportedly, still not official for Brian Callahan. Callahan was scheduled to meet with David Tepper in Carolina today and with Arthur Blank and the Brain Trust in Atlanta tomorrow. The fact that the Titans did not let Brian Callahan leave the building without an offer and without sealing this deal tells me that, again, all they interviewed in person was David Shaw, Thomas Brown, and Brian Callahan. This was 100% Amy Adams Strunk's number one choice.
Yeah, it was.
And Rand Carthon, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to hide it, and they should have. They cast a wide net, though. They did go defensive. They did go in a lot of different directions. I'm still shocked somewhat that Ben Johnson didn't take the interview, but I guess when you're interfering his DC, it was Aaron Glenn who did an interview here with his job. Maybe they exchange information. It's like, hey, probably won't be. I don't know what it was, but he didn't. But it's clear that Brian Callahan got the second interview request in person, and they closed the deal really quick, man. When you saw and, of course, Thomas Brown's second interview wasn't just a passive, let's interview him. I think there's a future for him in this league, being an offensive coordinator, potentially head coach one day, or maybe even here in Nashville. But it was very unique on how we saw it speed up yesterday, and then we ended up getting the hiring also.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that Amy Adams Strunk made clear when she talked to Mike Keith in that interview after Mike Vrabel was fired, that they have a vision, but they weren't going to necessarily talk about it yet. And Rand Carthon did not really speak about it either when we spoke to Rand Carthon. And I think a big part of that is, they wanted to hear from these head coaching candidates on what their vision for this team is, because it needs to be a pretty solid one that aligns with them to be able to move forward, because there's a lot of rebuilding that has to happen, and it's not going to be easy. I think that she saw that, Rand Carthon saw that in the initial interview, and then when you bring him in-house, it's pretty much a done deal. Like, we didn't see they've completed this interview. It was pretty much like they wanted him to have the job after that, and that makes me think that his vision aligned with theirs, and that's all they needed to see. They've done their homework about what he's done as an offensive coordinator with the Bengals. They've seen him head to head. Amy has watched the Bengals beat this Titans team more than they have not. So if anything, hey, now we're taking a piece of your team and we're bringing them over here.
Yeah.
Everything we know about this search points to the fact that Brian Callahan was the number one choice, beginning with the fact that he was the first candidate to receive a Zoom interview, and it was reported that he was the first candidate to receive a second interview. Whatever he said in that first interview worked. And I think they knew when they sent a plane to Cincinnati to fly him down here for his second interview, which we also know from a Cincinnati writer who wrote that in The Athletic last night. They sent a plane up there knowing that their head coach was on it when he came back, and that they were not letting him get on anybody else's plane to go to Carolina or to go to Atlanta. Buck Rising spoke last night on A to Z Sports Primetime about the offensive coordinator hire that Brian Callahan will make. He also wrote about this on AtoZSports.com earlier this morning, that there is a leading candidate to be the OC here in Tennessee.
Thomas Brown, who was interviewed here to be the next head coach, and who, an educated guess, I believe it is their intention to bring him in as the offensive coordinator, pending what other opportunities might be available to Thomas Brown under Brian Callahan.
There you go. Buck Rising saying that last night on A to Z Sports Primetime, writing as much on AtoZSports.com this morning. You can check out that article that we tweeted out just a few minutes ago earlier in the show. We'll go ahead and retweet it right now at Ramon Kayla Will if you want to see that. Thomas Brown's stock, guys, is never going to be lower than coming off of a dreadful season in Carolina, linked to the number 32 offense of the NFL. And if you believe that this guy, as an extension of the Sean McVay coaching tree, where he was the running backs coach for the Super Bowl champion winning Rams a couple of years ago, if you believe that that guy has the traits to develop Will Levis because he spent time in Matthew Stafford's Super Bowl winning season and can hone in the traits and skills that Levis has that are very similar to Matthew Stafford, which we talked about last week as well, this is your best time to get in while you can. I think it is safe to assume at this point that the Titans will try to get 2 of the 3 of these names, Thomas Brown, Charles London, and/or Liam Cohen. I think 2 of those 3 guys are on the Titans staff starting in 2024. And if Thomas Brown leaves for a head coaching position after one season, then you just promote the next guy. And it wouldn't surprise me either if David Shaw was also added to this staff in some capacity, considering he spent time with Brian Callahan as well.
Yeah. And to me, I'll also be looking at a multitude of things. We've mentioned the quarterback a ton of time, and he should be the focal point of it too. But when you also look at how they spread the ball around from the tight ends that I know this fan base loves to talk about, whether that be Chig or whether that be Josh Wiley moving forward too, right? Cincinnati does a good job of that and have done a good job of that. They've been flawless in how they've incorporated those guys. The running backs, of course. Joe Mixon was the bell cow this year, but the way they incorporate him in the screen game, putting him in space, running the ball up the middle and also hitting the edge too. And they also play with violence with the way Cincinnati plays the run game. Whether their record is 9-8 this year, whatever the case may be, you can't say you played a game with Cincinnati, didn't expect physicality even on the offensive side of the ball. And then, of course, when you break down the receiving, like, they got 3 dudes on this team that are absolutely dudes, correct? Like, Jamar Chase, of course, 1,200 yards this season, a definitive number 1. That's what this team here has to figure out, too. Who's your definitive number 1? You had a 31-year-old guy in DeAndre Hopkins become your number 1 because nobody in that pack of young wide receivers accomplished that. Now, I think Traylon should be one of those main guys moving forward. How do you build a plan for him moving forward? I think it's going to be super important. But not just that. Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins also over 650 yards each this year. And you want to hear what's right behind him? Joe Mixon. So when we speak about Tajay Spears and incorporation of him being a 1,000-yard rusher and being able to also get you 300, almost 400 yards through the air, that complex style of offense to where it's not just 3 yards in a cloud of dust every single time. It's spreading the ball around to dudes. You look at, again, Tyler Boyd, 67 receptions. T. Higgins, with the games that he missed this year, 42 with over 650 yards. Like, we're speaking about a fluid offense. We're speaking about moving into a new era of competing to win games instead of trying to survive games. Oh, we are up by 7 points. Let's try to hold on to it through, to the end. No, that's not the case anymore, I would expect. Now, you do have to go draft well. You got to figure out what style of offense that Levis is going to like more. It ain't just an overnight flip of the switch. There's a lot that goes into this, but you got a guy that's been around or at least built the game plan to be able to do it. How you feel about your talent here is another conversation that Rand and his department has to handle. But as far as the production, it's there.
When it comes to Thomas Brown, question for you guys. So he's technically the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. Can David Tepper, say that he can't take a job if it's lateral, if he decides, if they decide to hire him as offensive coordinator?
For now, yes.
So he can technically block that.
He has this cycle, yes.
Okay, so that's the other thing we gotta think about too.
He's not going to block a guy though that's on a staff that the head coach isn't even there.
Right, and I just was bringing that up in terms of the offensive coordinator lateral move, because that is technically what he is with the Carolina Panthers right now. It'd be way better, I would feel like, going somewhere else.
Yeah, and whoever they hire is going to bring in probably
their own.
Too.
Yeah. That's, I think, the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Tannenbaum writes on ESPN.com last night that this is a B-plus hire. Writing, it's a strong hire when you look through the lens of quarterback development and the outstanding play of Burrow in Cincinnati. Titans fans should be excited Levis will now benefit from learning under Callahan, who will emphasize technique and fundamentals. In addition to Burrow, Stafford, and Manning, Callahan has worked with many other quarterbacks as well.
Yeah.
B+, huh?
Yep.
And I think
that's fair.
And I think part of that is just because he hasn't been a head coach yet.
Exactly.
I mean, I think you can't just assume he's going to be a home run hire. He doesn't have anything to prove he's been a head coach in this league to be successful. I mean, as a coordinator, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the play calling, while I'm convinced on it from what I've heard inside that building, I understand also other people aren't convinced yet that he can do the play calling thing. Like, that's something he looks to be doing here when he is brought on as head coach, is what Tom Pelissaro is saying. But I mean, I'm convinced, but I could see how others on the outside maybe aren't.
Yeah, you should question it. It's all right.
Yeah.
First-time head coach, I think for any first-time coach, the ceiling of a grade is probably B+. So that being said, I think Mike Tannenbaum is saying and writing there at ESPN.com that this is the best possible hire you could make if your options are limited to a guy that hasn't been a head coach yet.
Right.
Because the Titans were not interested in Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh. They did not want to give full roster control away when they just fired a coach who wanted full roster control.
And just to give a little bit of a breakdown, the way it's been explained to me and somewhat how I understand how those big decisions are made as far as starters, drafts, decisions to bench people, it usually breaks down in 4 different categories. It is GM, head coach, position coach, and then scouting department. That's how you really want to break it down. GM, head coach, position coach, and scouting department. Usually everybody has a vote. So when we're talking about roster control, I think the way most organizations roll is that way. And then from that right there, you don't hear discrepancies between who has this pick or that pick. Only time you get a lot of recognition is when you find that gem, right? When you find that hidden gem in the draft or an undrafted guy. That's where that type of praise and notoriety comes out to. But when you're drafting players, it's the entire group that makes these decisions.
I want to ask a question to you guys. I'm not necessarily taking a side of this either way, but I do think it is a legitimate question. Should the Titans have at least waited a day to talk with Bobby Slowick and get a deeper look inside what's going on in a divisional rival's building and get a free look at Bobby Slowick, the Houston Texans, why they are so successful, and talking with Bobby Slowick in person? Did they make a mistake by not bringing in more candidates?
Me personally, no. I like the idea of state secrets. I do. But here's the other secret behind it. You know mostly everything they're doing on the field anyway. How they operate behind the scenes, to me, can be somewhat irrelevant. If Rand has what he thinks is a method and how he's going to scout people moving forward, and he changes that scouting department around, which is some of the stuff that we've heard as far as in-house changes, then I don't think is relevant to the cause. Now, understanding how he play calls, you still got to stop him. You absolutely. C.J. Stroud does some things that's probably not on their tape, or not necessarily on their tape, but not necessarily in the breakdown of what they want to do and how they operate. I love the idea, but he can also take stuff from you too. Go back to Houston and be like, man, y'all, they are down bad in Tennessee. You know what I'm saying? Like, it works both ways. The idea of it, yes, Will, I agree with you. You could do that, but you also run the risk of if Callahan goes to Carolina, he might not leave there either.
That's the thing for me. I mean, I think Amy, like you had mentioned earlier, Will, I mean, she knew it was her guy. Look, with Slowick, too, this is his first year in Houston as the offensive coordinator. I don't know, and this isn't because I am assuming that he has no leadership. I'm not trying to say he has no leadership skills or any of that. I have not heard, though, in terms of being a head coach and a leader, I have not heard yet as much about that side of him.
Of Slowick?
Then
Okay.
I have, like, the offensive-minded guru. The only reason why it's different, I feel like, for Callahan, because we're hearing from so many people and players that he's a leader of men, too, and that he's ready for that part of it. I don't know if Slowick was ready to be a head coach with all the other things that come along with that. And maybe that is another year down in Houston, or maybe someone gives him an opportunity. But I think that when Amy looks at the full picture of what she really needs here to build this organization back up, she needed to make sure she had that foundation, that he was going to be the leader that they need. Not just the offensive bright mind, but that leader of the guys in that locker room.
I'm trying to think real quick. What does Slowick have that Brian Callahan wouldn't?
Play calling experience.
play calling
Yeah.
experience
for 1 year in Houston.
Because
for 1 year.
I think Bobby Slowick is this cycle's Ben Johnson. I think Ben Johnson a year ago is in the exact position Bobby Slowick is right now.
Yeah.
An option for head coaching positions. And maybe that's unfair to Ben Johnson because I do think Ben Johnson was likely offered a closer look at some teams last season. But I think Bobby Slowick this time next year can pick his location and is number one on a lot of boards. And honestly, if it isn't for one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport and the defending college football national championship coach both being available, maybe Bobby Slowick does get a job this time around. But I think Bobby Slowick is the number one guy on everyone's board this time next year, just so he can prove that he can do it again.
Yep.
And that isn't just C.J. Stroud cooking in a rookie season. And how do defenses adjust now to Bobby Slowick? I wanted him as my pick because I think he has the highest ceiling, but I also recognize that he almost certainly, of the options the Titans interviewed, has the lowest floor as well. He was the biggest risk in the Mike McDaniel type offensive guru. I just saw what happened with C.J. Stroud, and I wanted to sign up for that as quickly as I possibly could. But I do think Brian Callahan is a great pick, and I think Amy Adams Strunk clearly had this vision in mind. And I wonder if Ran Carthon even had Brian Callahan on the back of his mind when he was asked at his introductory press conference about this search.
Yep.
Hey, what's your vision? Well, I think if he was being honest with us, Ran Carthon probably would have said, my vision is the offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah.
Nathan and Smyrna next on the phone lines. Hey, Nathan.
Hey, I'm just thinking about the situation with the dad. Why not just make him the offensive coordinator if Brian's going to be the one making the play calls anyway? Have Dad be, and that way you don't have to pay Haslam anything.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. It's an option. I do think ultimately that will come down to whether or not Bill Callahan has a stipulation in his contract that says, if my son ever gets a head coaching position, I can go there. Yeah. We don't know that. That's been speculated on social media and on the internet. There is an opportunity for that to be the case and to kind of circumvent the normal process in order to bring him over. But I don't think you would have to make Bill Callahan the OC in order to add him.
You know what you can do? Throw a label on it. Run game coordinator.
He would probably be associate head coach and O-line coach is probably what would happen.
Absolutely.
You would have to add another title in order for him to make a lateral move and for the Haslams to probably be okay with it.
Yeah.
But whatever that means, I mean, he can be the assistant to the regional manager for all I care. Like, I think he ultimately is going to be a part of the staff.
It would be good to see, man, of course. And one thing, too, is watching the pathway, and we'll probably have to go back and look at the breakdown of these new, younger head coaches that's gotten jobs and how teams need to probably stick with them and let them grow, too. Mm-hmm. Because here's the thing about it. There will probably be some hurdles in which Brian Callahan has to get over here as a new head coach for the first time. The same way I look at how Cincinnati allows Zach Taylor to grow. And they're benefiting somewhat if they can keep Joe Burrows healthy. The same way you had Dan Campbell grow as a coach. When you're talking about he got a B+ from who, Will, from ESPN, the great
Mike Tannenbaum. Former NFL exec.
Look at Coach LaFleur, post Aaron Rodgers, how you got to grow as a head coach too. That's why, to me, getting a B+ from Tannenbaum, it's like, okay, at least we got something to work with. At least I know the confidence of him being capable of doing the job is there. There will be, I think, hurdles he's got to cross in a lot of different ways here to get the production that this team needs. But all in all, I like the hire. I do. He was on our top list for a while, and Kayla put him at the top of her list for sure.
It's interesting, too. This is the first time in a while that they haven't hired a guy who's played in the NFL. Like, that's the other thing the Titans have been known to do is hire somebody who's had that NFL playing experience. He hasn't had the NFL player experience, but he's had a lifetime of growing up around the game. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that they are going a different direction in that terms of things, too, because they did hire a lot of people, or they did interview a lot of people that had obviously had experience playing in the NFL.
To be exact, Brian Callahan will be the Titans' first head coach who did not play in the NFL since Jerry Glanville coached the run-and-shoot Oilers in the late 80s.
There you go.
Terry McCormick first tweeting that out last night, TitanInsider.com.
Didn't we bring that up, too? Earlier in this process, maybe they want to get back to the Oilers run-and-shoot. We had that conversation.
Well,
over there.
I don't think this
Mildly.
means that this doesn't mean the offense is the run and shoot. It
but
just
it's
means that
advancing what they've done.
One similarity. Yeah. 615-737-1045, the final call for phone calls. Of course, the Buck Rising Show is on deck. We'll recap everything we've learned this morning about new Titans head coach, reportedly from Tom Pelissero, Brian Callahan. We'll hear from Mo Egger, Cincinnati radio host, who gave us some good news for Brian Callahan's first staff. We'll also get to Buck Rising's reporting this morning on potential offensive coordinator candidates. Up next. RKW is brewed up by 8th and Roast on 104.5 The Zone as we wrap up the show. 615-737-1045. The Buck Rising Show is up next. He will have the latest as he reported on A2ZSports.com this morning. Brian Callahan will be the Titans' offensive play caller in addition to being the head coach. We got this from Cincinnati radio host Mo Edgar on ESPN 1530 earlier this morning. And again, if you missed that entire conversation, you can find it right now. Podcasts are already up wherever you download audio. Apple, Spotify, 1045thezone.com, and hit the subscribe button while you are there. This was Mo Edgar earlier this morning on Brian Callahan bringing his dad, Bill, with him to Tennessee.
I think there's always been a sense of it's a matter of when and not if he becomes a head coach. I've always been sort of interested in wondering, does he end up being a plan B for a team that doesn't get, obviously not a consideration in Nashville, but doesn't get Mike Vrabel or doesn't get Bill Belichick or doesn't get Jim Harbaugh. But, look, this is a guy who's grown up in the game. My understanding is he's going to bring his dad with him to be the offensive line coach, Bill Callahan, the former head coach of the Oakland Raiders. I've certainly read that. He has had, if you go to when this coaching staff took over, they were a punchline. And that first season with Zach Taylor, they were miserable, 2-14. I think Brian Callahan, if he's smart, and I think he is, not only did he have a hand in this franchise becoming one of the better teams in the NFL, at least for a couple of years, he not only had a hand in it, I'm sure there were lots of things that he could grab from that experience that he could apply to his next job in Nashville.
It's funny in the F&M Bank chat, Timmy writes it on YouTube and says, hey, it's now being reported on X that Bill Callahan will be added onto the staff too. That was from this show about an hour and a half ago. Courtesy of Mo Edgar. So, yes, that is correct. We put that on Twitter, and then people are not attributing it to us and put it as their own.
Gotta love Twitter.
If you
X.
absolutely go look up Bill Callahan's name, man. ESPN Cleveland is doing a little bit of a show, and they're somewhat worried that Callahan can leave because of his son being hired here, and Brian Callahan. Let's say that first. It's Brian Callahan's job, okay?
Right.
And it's not that the fact that you need his dad, but here's the thing. If they're worried about losing a guy like him from their staff, I think it says a lot about what he can do for teams, correct? Mm-hmm. And say what you want to about it, and some people have been calling with the nepotism conversation. This situation is totally different. You go after a guy that has this immense amount of talent that can coach up guys, right? That's what we're looking for. Like the development of these players, I think, is what you're looking forward to. And it was just sent to me by one of my sources that the owner can block any coach move except for the head coach also.
That's correct.
Right.
So this has to be given grace if he's going to be let out of his contract in Cleveland.
Yeah, Big Jim Haslam can absolutely block that if he really wanted to.
And GM Andrew Berry, I guess, was asked, he had his season in review presser yesterday up in Cleveland. My buddy said that he was asked about that, raved about Bill Callahan. And this was before, though, the news came out about his son getting the job here. So there was no questions asked about that, obviously. But they were very, very happy with what he's done there. Yeah. So I don't know if they will want him to leave.
Well, they won't want him to leave for sure. But, I mean, it's his son. Yeah. I don't know. This from Jake Robertson on Twitter a few minutes ago. This is going to make you happy and sad at the same time, so you're sitting down. I'm glad. Bill Callahan's tackles last season gave up 16 sacks. They had 2 starters and 3 backups play tackle last year. Andre Dillard gave up 12 by himself.
I shouldn't laugh.
Jalen Duncan gave up 9. So 2 tackles for the Titans gave up more sacks than all of the tackles for the Browns last season in the same amount of games.
Lord. And they were dealing with injuries, too.
Lord.
Philip in Franklin wraps up the show this morning. What's up, Philip?
Hey, guys. How are you?
Great.
Good.
Good morning.
Ramon, this will ring home with you. Before we get too giddy over this new coach, Lane and Monty Kiffin, we thought they were going to be the saviors of the University of Tennessee. Derek Dooley is another one because of his dad, Vince. And I don't know. I hope this guy is the most successful coach in history. But before we get too giddy over him, he's got to come here and prove himself. And I just want us to stay grounded around that because he hasn't done that yet. And the second thing is everybody's been talking about Miss Amy and her vision for the Titans. When did Miss Amy get her great degree in football? She's the owner, of course, and has lots of money, but I just have struggled the last 2 weeks listening to all the shows on the zone around Miss Amy's vision, and it's no different from any owner. They want to win the Super Bowl.
Well, her vision is, and her degree in football is being a part of the family that's owned the team for her entire life.
And second of all, when it comes to Lane Kiffin, the maturity level of him at 32 when he was hired by the Oakland Raiders was not mature. And so I don't think you should compare him to a Brian Callahan, who's been said by tons of people and players what the type of leader he is. And he's actually worked his way up to this point. He was never given a job at any point early on in his career as a head coach by his dad.
Yeah, and the other two is we're talking about one of them hiring his dad to be the defensive coordinator in the NFL when he's also a proven winner in Tampa, invented the Tampa 2 type of defense too that everybody still live by. You have a deep middle linebacker drop back, you know who you think of? Monty Kiffin. Okay, we're talking about an offensive line coach. That is a very specific role that we're speaking of respectfully when I talk about him hiring Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach.
Saying that all coaches whose dads were also coaches are going to be bad, like Lane Kiffin and Derek Dooley, is like saying every coach who has a brother in the league, like John and Jim Harbaugh, are going to be great coaches. Their family relationship has nothing to do with the fact that, like, oh, this precedent, this means this because, well, we've already had father-sons that haven't worked in college. Like, that has nothing to do with the Tennessee Titans and Brian and Bill Callahan, respectfully, Philip. So I understand the hesitation, right? We appreciate your call. It's fair, but I mean, I don't think that's the same thing as a young Lane Kiffin who was nowhere near ready to be a head coach from a maturity standpoint when he got the Tennessee job.
We also preface all of this by saying he still got to prove himself.
Absolutely, he does.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the show. The Bunk Rising Show is up next. It is a great day to keep 104.5 The Zone on all day. Buck Rising Show, Blaine and Mickey, 3HL. They will have you covered until 6 p.m. Central. There is nowhere else to go, and you're not going to go anywhere else. So keep it locked in right here to the latest developments as it pertains to the Titans and Brian Callahan. The Buck Rising Show is next, and Ramon Foster sends you home right now.
You must remember at all times, it's okay to celebrate good things. And also, your Twitter fingers and your mic is always hot.